You are listening to Deep Sea Embers by Yuan Tong. Novels from Novel Fire. Chapter 181. History, Pollution, and the Black Sun. A message that suddenly appeared on the chronology pillar. A city-state that no one knew about. The battles that no one remembered. The defeats and sacrifices that no one saw. A history that did not exist in anyone's memory. And after its demise, there was only a trace of its existence left in the world. And even if the message amounted to nothing more than an extremely short sentence, it's likely at the cost of countless lives from those flame bearers to transmit this message. After listening to Morris's explanation, Duncan fell into deep thought due to the shock. He's got a general idea of what this faith did according to the Flame Codex he read. Unlike the Storm, Wisdom, and Death Church, the flame bearers followed a teaching that's much more ethereal and harder to grasp. It's history. History was the memory of civilization. If history becomes corrupted, so does the memory of civilization itself. When that occurs, even reality itself could be bent to the corruptor's will. Control history, control the world. To combat this threat, flame bearers are constantly working behind the scenes to fight against those who pose a threat. They are often forgotten, often never seen, and often perished within history itself. Nevertheless, their impact continues to be felt today in the form of everyday living. Who did they worship? The eternal flame Ta Rujin, a giant who guards against the corruption of history, the embodiment of civilization's memory. According to the Flame Codex, the giant integrated the first flame created by mortals into its body. Through this flame, it records the correct history and grows with it in size, and once Ta Rujin grows big enough, he will be immune to corruption and safeguard history in its entirety. Of course, the origin story was nothing more than bullocks in Duncan's view. He wouldn't dismiss the flame bearers did work to combat the corruption of history, but the flame giant was a whole different matter. So they did something like that before already, Duncan muttered thoughtfully. What did you say? Morris didn't process the comment and asked, Did what before already? What do you mean? It's nothing, just talking to myself. Duncan shook his head and met the old gent's gaze with a certain severity. The intel you brought is very important. The intel I brought? Morris now got really confused. You mean the message, the one that appeared on the flame bearer's pillar? Duncan nodded with a frown. But there's one thing I'm curious about. Did the Black Sun have the power to corrupt history? This, Morris hesitated, obviously unsure due to this not being within the scope of his expertise. I am not very clear about the authority of the Black Sun, which is probably only understood by those experts who specialize in fighting against evil gods. But as far as I know, the Black Sun should theoretically not have this ability. While Duncan nodded and continued to dwell on the issue with unease plastered all over his face, Morris took the time to observe the subspatial shadow sitting opposite of himself. This Mr. Duncan has always been polite and patient. He likes to discuss academic issues with me and ask questions from time to time, just like the last time I visited the antique shop. Now he seems interested in the flame bearers and their mission of preserving history. But why, though? Does he suspect someone's polluting history? Is this the reason why Laham ordered me to get into contact with this being? What is his relationship with Laham? What is his stance on the order of this world? Am I stuck in the middle of games between gods? The chaotic thoughts rose and fell in Morris's mind, forcing him to become more cautious in what he should do and what role he might be playing in this mission. In fact, Morris got this inkling sensation that Laham was watching the conversation through him as an avatar right now. He didn't know why, but that's what he's getting. While the old gentleman was having wild thoughts, Duncan finally ended his musings and looked up, half curious and half lamenting. I say, those scientists have done so many bad things in the past. Doesn't anyone want to do something about them, like eradicating the group? How can it be that easy to eliminate an evil god's faith? Morris subconsciously shook his head. Heretical beliefs are like mercury entering the body, pervasive and permeating. No matter how much they are eliminated, new ones will always be sprouting. In the end, the main source of the problem remains with the evil god. Until we remove the core of the problem, the branches that spawn from it will keep coming. As Morris explained, he sighed harder at the situation. Most individuals are good people at heart. They work hard and live to their fullest, but because of a single unexpected setback in their life, they would fall from grace and touch upon forbidden knowledge. You see, any ordinary citizen can become a heretic by donning the black robe of the evil gods. How can the authorities clean them out when you have an open invitation like that? Speaking of this, the old gentleman subconsciously glanced at Duncan again with a strange glint in his eyes. Why are you looking at me like that? Duncan appeared offended at the accusing look. With all due respect, Morris took a gentle breath and plucked up the courage. But shouldn't you know this all too well, about a mortal being corrupted? Spreading his arms out, Duncan shakes his head in denial. How am I supposed to know? I'm a law-abiding citizen. Even in my free time, I will report on the closest heretic to the authorities. Morris, the older man obviously didn't buy it and nearly choked. Not minding the accusation, Duncan figured he better shift the conversation back on track lest this spiral out of hand. But I understand what you mean. Unless we can directly target the evil god, their influence will never wane. However, something is bothering me. Is the Black Sun's influence really that strong? I've seen its lifeless state. Even when it communicated with me, it had to do it through a mental echo instead of speaking. How does a being that so weak able to pollute the world? The corners of Morris's mouth visibly twitched. No matter how bad the state of the Black Sun is, it is only weak in your eye, unfortunately. We mortals are not so durable. Duncan felt an indescribable urge to rebuttal that claim and say he's human too. However, he reconsidered the idea after taking the mental and physical health of the old historian into account. Besides, spouting something like that would only make him look weird and awkward when the other side already saw his true appearance. It's then Morris seemed to think of something else. After a pause, he added, "But your doubts may also point to the crux of the matter. If the state of the Black Sun is really as bad as you say, his pollution of the world really shouldn't be so strong. At least it shouldn't make the Suntists this tricky to handle. All this may perhaps have something to do with the existence of those sun heirs." "The offsprings of the sun," muttered Duncan thoughtfully. His mind couldn't help but think of the tall, thin black shadow that had appeared in Shirley's dream before. Although there was no clear evidence, he always felt that the thing was probably related to the legendary sun offsprings. The Black Sun has long fallen and can no longer shine on this world, but the heirs of the Black Sun continue to this day. If there's any power causing the influence, it would be the next of kin. But another key problem remains unsolved. The Black Sun doesn't have the power to pollute history, and its descendants most certainly couldn't. Yet the forgotten city-state of Wilhelm did send a message that the Black Sun has returned from history. That meant history has been polluted at least once. In that case, who's helping the Suntists to resurrect their god? Chapter 182. A peaceful tomorrow will still come. The atmosphere in the shop had fallen eerily silent after the last exchange. Morris was still seated in the chair, but his mind was a fluctuating mess of reverberating murmurs like a broken record. Sadly, he couldn't just flee before this Mr. Duncan. Until the subspatial shadow was satisfied with the conversation, he must endure. Last question, if something is really polluting history, how do we solve this problem? Is there really someone contaminating history? Morris raised his head sluggishly and faced Duncan in confusion. Who are you referring to? No matter who it is, Duncan said lightly. It could be subspace, it could be the Black Sun, it could be other heretical gods. In short, if something is trying to pollute history, how can it be solved? How do the flame bearers cope with such a crisis? Morris was stunned for a moment, shaking his head hesitantly. I'm sorry I can't answer you. This is beyond my knowledge, and even the flame bearers, I'm afraid only the most powerful saints or chosen ones know the secrets of history. Most of the flame bearers, like the guardians of the Storm Church, are only doing daily work such as eradicating heresy and purifying pollution. After all, real historical pollution is almost impossible. You're right, my question is too in-depth, so it is difficult for you to answer these questions, Duncan sighed softly. He realized that his curiosity had spiraled out of hand, and he might have unintentionally caused harm for the old gent by adding psychological pressure. Then let's stop here today. An unprecedented sense of relaxation suddenly swept over Morris's mind, allowing the poor fella to heave a sigh of relief. His mind has been groggy since just now, his thinking intermittent, and there are many questions lingering in his head that couldn't be organized. At this time, Duncan's willingness to end the conversation was a godsend. Meanwhile, the shop owner had turned away to glance out the window. In terms of hour, it was still a while before sunset, but the gloomy sky had made it completely dark outside. Even the gas street lamps had lit up in advance, illuminating the gloomy streets in contrast to the dark clouds overhead. It's a bad day. Duncan withdrew his gaze and looked at the old gent. Do you want to stay? Nina should have finished prepping dinner. Morris's heart suddenly pounded as he recalled a popular phrase in the Truth Academy, which was used to describe those scholars who chased the most crazy and legendary knowledge, swimming in subspace, bullshitting in front of evil gods, watching the gods fight, and rubbing the soup bowl together at the dinner table. Let's pretend this antique shop was subspace. And let's pretend Mr. Duncan's rank was equal to the gods. As let's pretend this subspatial shadow was having a bout against the god of wisdom. Then Morris most certainly has now achieved 3 of the 4 wonders from that popular phrase. All that's missing was an exchange of the soup bowl. Actually, Morris carefully watched his phrasing. Actually, you want to leave, right? Duncan nodded without waiting for the old man to finish. He's not so clueless to be this blind. Although I want to say that the weather is bad and you should stay for a bowl of soup, I'm sure you much prefer to get some relief from the pressure of being in my presence. Morris quickly got up and nodded. Frankly, every minute is torment. Of course, I don't mean to offend, it's just... No need to explain, I understand. Duncan waved his hand with a slightly helpless expression on his face. If we can change to a more relaxed environment of meeting, then I would love to chat some more about history and the gods. I'm very interested in knowledge. Of course, there is no malicious interest on my part, but from the look of things, this meeting won't work. Truthfully, I had fallen into a trance several times already, and nearly forgot the truth I saw. Your curiosity and friendliness are true like a friend, and the first time I ever met someone as friendly as you. The old man felt honestly tied inside. He wanted to find more positive points to say, but he didn't have the vocabulary in his mindset that's fitting. If you can't find the right wording, then don't. There's no need to force yourself. Just don't report me after leaving, okay? Duncan chuckled at the troubled historian. No, I would never do that. Morris waved his hand again and again when he heard this. You did save Heidi's life regardless of the truth, and you have always showed a friendly attitude. I have no reason to report it. Not to mention. The old man suddenly hesitated, smiled bitterly, and spread out his hand. Looking at your appearance, I don't think you're afraid of anyone reporting you. It would make me feel troubled, though, Duncan said casually, but it's probably not a big problem. Then he paused and glanced up in the direction of the 2nd floor. If the weather improves tomorrow, Nina will go to school as usual. Nina, Morris blinked, causing the old historian to remember the flaming arc he saw. With a vague guess of the truth, he decides to muster up the courage and ask, Nina, is she part of what those Suntists worship? He didn't get to finish, because Duncan had started shaking his head. Nina is Nina, you don't have to be curious about the secrets behind her, Duncan said softly. Just treat her as usual, that way nothing will happen. I see. Morris lowered his head slightly and felt a sense of great relief after hearing Duncan's statement. Then it's time for me to leave. Please say goodbye to Nina on my behalf. My current state is not very suitable for seeing her again. Duncan nods and got up to personally see the old gent out as proper etiquette. There are almost no pedestrians left on the streets, only the glow of the street lamps illuminating the cloudy city that's starting to pick up wind and frost. Morris tightened his coat at the cold temperature and pressed the top hat he was wearing, but before walking to his car, he couldn't help but glance back at Duncan. It's still the peacefully smiling man of the shop, and this time, the streets were no longer twisting and warping in the terrifying manner as it was in the beginning. Mr. Duncan, Morris said suddenly, you actually like this place, don't you? Yes, I quite like it here. Duncan laughed and waved his hand at the old man. So go home and go safely. Plan will be safe tomorrow and every day after that. Morris tipped his hat off for that as gratitude and immediately entered his parked car on the side of the road. Duncan didn't turn and go back inside right away. Instead, he watched the vehicle depart until it's completely out of sight. He's pondering something in his head after this unexpected meeting. The first question was whether the old man would report him after he went back. The conclusion he got was the possibility being extremely small. If he's just an ordinary cultist or even a slightly more advanced Suntist priest, then Morris would have 100% reported back to the authorities. But today, it seems that his image in the eyes of the other party wasn't an ancient god, but a friendly shadow that just wants to live in the city. This pushed the odds down to 0. Of course, Duncan had a very good logical reason for that thinking. Unlike the required manpower to exterminate a few cultists or a priest, merely a team of guardians who could defeat an evil god of subspace, the bishop up in the cathedral, forget it. In fact, Morris had better odds of succeeding by reporting this to his god of wisdom than to the church. And even without considering all this, Duncan actually didn't care if he's reported. After all, Vanna the Inquisitor, who was at the apex of the guardians in the Storm Church, was honestly quite weak in his eye. Now, compared to this trivial question, Duncan was actually more concerned about Nina's current state. A flaming arc that's constantly gushing out fire. This is the truth that Morris sees in Nina with the true eye given to him by the god of wisdom. Sun fragments? Duncan raised his head and peered up into the dark sky. What exactly is the sun in this world? Chapter 183, 183. The invasion after nightfall. Did the teacher just leave? Nina came to the first floor and immediately moped after finding Morris had left. Why didn't you ask him to stay, Uncle? The weather is so bad and you still let teacher leave. Any later and it will get dark, Duncan casually said as he turned to lock the door. Then walking over to the stairs, he drove over so a little rain won't hinder him anyways. But teacher doesn't seem to be feeling well, Nina protested as she went upstairs. He should have rested a little longer. Duncan contemplated the idea, thinking that if the old man really rested here for a while, then he might have felt even worse. But he couldn't explain it to Nina, so he could only say a few pointless words to fiddle through the subject. Once inside the kitchen, the pair quickly seated themselves for dinner. Nina had prepared beet soup, toast, vegetable rolls, and sliced ham. Clearly, the assortment was meant for more than one person. If we can't finish, then save the leftovers for the morning, Nina muttered, then looked up at Duncan curiously. What did you tell teacher? I couldn't hear your conversation while upstairs, but the noise was quite lively. Duncan eyed Nina's lively appearance. As always, she's bright, happy, and full of life without an ounce of negative air. No matter how he looked at her, there's no hint of a supernatural entity possessing the girl. Sun fragment, what exactly is that thing? Duncan originally thought the item was something tangible, but now it appears he's jumped to conclusions. Whatever the sun fragment was, it's slumbering inside Nina's body. Uncle Duncan, Nina noticed the weird gaze coming from across the table and squirmed uncomfortably. Is there something stuck on my face? No, nothing. Duncan shook his head and decided to change the topic by ripping a piece of bread. By the way, have you been feeling any discomfort lately? That weird dream from before, did you re-encounter it? No, Nina waved her hand. I stopped having that weird dream after Miss Heidi gave me that therapy session. I'm feeling full of energy every day. She paused, then looked at Duncan a little worriedly. Uncle, what's wrong? Why do I suddenly feel like you're acting weird? Did you and Mr. Morris talk about it? Can't be about my last exam grade. No, don't get weird thoughts. Your teacher didn't visit just to complain about your grades. Eat first. Nina nods and readily agrees since she's not going to be lectured. She could see something was bothering her uncle but didn't know what. In the lower city, deep in the dilapidated and dim alleys, the hastily lit gas lamps finally dispelled the surrounding darkness before night completely enveloped these streets. Under this condition, Shirley lay next to the windowsill and stared out into the dark streets with fascination. You're looking outside again. What's there to see? Dog's voice sounded from the side as the chains connecting the pair rattled due to the movement. I can't sleep because it's early and there's nothing to do. It's boring, Shirley muttered. Do you want to go out tomorrow and continue to make trouble for those cultists? No, I doubt we will get anything out of it. Shirley shook her head after thinking about the idea. I don't know if the church people really improved their skills, but the cultists in the city seem to have been cleaned out recently. I can't even smell their stench. The Suntists are indeed mostly gone. Maybe they really have been caught by the authorities. Dog leaned over and lazily lay at Shirley's feet. But I don't think you're like this because you're bored. Shirley suddenly rolled her eyes. Then what else could it be? Are you thinking about that side? Dog raised his head, the shimmering red light flickering from his hollow eye sockets. Thinking about that warm home, the bright room, and the hot meal. You miss how someone is willing to wake you up in the morning for breakfast, and maybe you miss spending time with that Nina. Or perhaps you're thinking about him. XXX, shut up, you're so annoying. Shirley tugged the chain with her right arm and rudely interrupted Dog. I'm not a crying little baby anymore. How can I be so weak? Dog didn't care about Shirley's rough reaction. Longing for light and warmth is not a weakness. It only proves that you are still human. Shirley suddenly froze, followed by a look of disgust. Why are you XXX acting so mushy with me all of a sudden? You're sounding all scholarly as well. I'm still human. Are you praising me or insulting me by saying I haven't grown bigger after so many years? Don't think that after fusing with me that you're actually a demon yourself. There is nothing wrong with admitting your human side. Dog shook his ugly head. Besides, don't forget, it's not just this chain that connects me to you. I can feel any emotional changes you experience, remember. Shut up. Shirley turned her face away like she's irritated at being read like an open book. You don't have to keep pressing me like this. If you do, I will really go visit Nina tomorrow and bring you along. I'm sure Mr. Duncan will have fun talking with you until you wet your bones. Dog finally stopped talking, which only roused another light kick from the girl at the awkward silence. "Quit fretting about me, I have you don't I?" Shirley teased. "You're mushier than me when you start." Dog moved away and caused the chains to rattle. "Any more and I might vomit. Then there's going to be a new hole in the floor from the acid." Despite their innocent quibbling, the pair obviously enjoyed each other's company, especially Shirley, who was feeling slightly down from having her life scrambled recently. "It's good like this. Everything is back on track, and everyone can go back to their lives like before. That warm and peaceful place isn't for you, Shirley. It doesn't belong to you and is dangerous." After comforting herself, Shirley heaved a soft sigh to only freeze in the next second. She sensed something, an ominous and dark-natured presence that's fast approaching. It's sending her alarm bells ringing. Dog also jerked up from his position and took an aggressive stance toward the darkness inside the house. He's vigilant and ready to strike at anyone or anything that might pop out. Due to the need to save money, most of the rooms here were dark due to Shirley turning off the oil lamp on the table. Usually, this wouldn't be an issue since the light from the street lights would faintly spill over and hit the window. Unfortunately, that seems to have been a mistake tonight. Foulness had started to ooze from the cracks in the walls. "Dog," Shirley subconsciously tightened the chain in her hand. "I know," Dog lets out a low growl simultaneously. "I'm watching. Something is coming. They're surrounding us. Brewer. What the hell are these things? My eyes are going blurry." Before the words from the dark hound could finish, Shirley had noticed the faint light from the street lamps warping and disappearing, as if a thick layer of fog had barricaded this room from the outside. Sure enough, even the picture from the window had disappeared, replaced by a murky darkness of swirling nothingness. Once completely isolated, the shadows finally pierced through and converged into several figures opposite of the two occupants inside. They were dressed in tattered black robes that exposed their thin, wood-like arms, and their waists hung a pitch-black Bible that seemed to be drenched in a suspicious dark liquid that's constantly dripping. But that's not all, though. On each of their chests hung a spiked iron emblem that embodied a pale and creepy white flame. "Thou shalt perish." The leading black robe raised a finger and pointed it to the stunned-looking girl in the room. "XXXX, he's an Ender missionary." Dog's exclaiming cry was so loud that it knocked Shirley straight back to reality. Chapter 184. The final attack of the Ender missionaries. The roar of Dog's broken recorder voice exploded like thunder, echoing in the dilapidated hut and shocking the assailants by sheer magnitude of its shockwave. Then in the following second, something even more shocking occurred, with Shirley flipping the chain and pulling the dark hound into her hand to commit a meteoric smash at the nearest Ender. The girl actually didn't know much about these Ender missionaries and only had vague idea that they're cultists. However, what she did know told her they're crazier and more extreme than the Suntists by worshipping subspace itself. As to why they're here for her, Shirley honestly didn't have a clue. But it didn't matter. If they want to fight, then so be it. The huge dark hound whizzed through the air like a cannonball and instantly smashed into the nearest Ender. After the muffled sound of flesh and blood colliding with bones spilled into the air, the attacker flew out and crashed into the nearest wall, making an audible splat at impact. Not missing this chance, Shirley promptly pulled the chain back and dragged Dog back to her side and swung at another. Sadly, a sneak only works if it's done without the foe knowing. In the ensuing fight, the black robes scattered and avoided further damage. They obviously had more combat experience than those grunts from the Suntists. "Thou shalt perish," one of the Black Hoods point and shout at Shirley after narrowly scraping past Dog's skeletal head. "How about you eat my XXX meteor hammer?" Shirley was extremely irritable at the moment and wanted nothing less than smashing the foe into mush. The girl did just that by taking another swing with a more focused attempt. However, it's through these new swings of her weapon that she noticed something terribly wrong with her body. Shirley felt tired, not in a severe manner, but the exhaustion did start to get noticeable. Not only that, there's also a strange, buzzing sound plaguing her head, causing the girl to grow irate and an urge to charge at the enemy regardless of the cost to her own safety. "My brothers and sisters, the curse of flesh and blood will not take us." The first Ender that had taken a direct hit suddenly cried out with a chant. His body had started to make a hair-raising, crunching sound from the ground, as if the bones were being bent and snapped while he crawled up. Then, as if blessed by the divine prayer, the surrounding Enders all stopped their evasive maneuvers and raised their arms in worship. The way they're behaving was no different from someone gaining infinite courage and strength. This shocked Shirley because she was witnessing the changes of these freaks in real time. Their skinny figures had begun to expand, twist, and crunch from being bent and extended. First, it was the arms that grew longer with the nails turning into Wolverine-like claws. Then secondly, those legs had bent into an animalistic shape, similar to dogs' back hind legs to give it more jumping power. Lastly, that face had turned feral with vampiric fangs that extended past the lips. They're truly more beast than man at this point. What kind of thing is this XXXX? Of course, Shirley did not sit around to let them finish their transformation. Almost simultaneous to their change, the girl had flung her chain in a wide arcing whip at the nearest foe. It made a perfect hit, fracturing bone and snapping tendon at the impact. Although the ender in question wasn't killed on the spot, it did interrupt this one's mutation, meaning one less foe to deal with afterward. Unfortunately, the drain on her strength had also increased, as well as the urge to violently charge and die with the enemy. These enders are crazy XXXX who voluntarily embraced subspace. Both their words and presence are carriers of pollution. Dog's unprecedented impatience suddenly sounded in Shirley's mind. Don't let them continue their prayer. Smash whichever bastard that speaks, and don't look them in the eye. Between the electrifying moment of life and death, a cold glint suddenly shot out from the edge of Shirley's peripheral vision. She instinctively wanted to dodge, but the bone spear came way too fast and stabbed her right in the arm. This directly hindered the girl's ability to swing the chain and counterattack, which only got worse by the ever-increasing drain on her stamina. Taking advantage of this opening, another ender spread open his arms again and chanted a vicious prayer. Thou shalt not heal. Bang! Get lost, you XXXX! Shirley rounded the crazed bastard's head with Dog's own skull, causing a huge splat of brain and blood to smear across the nearest wall. But then in the succeeding exchange, a sharp stinging pain speared into the girl's back and made her hiss. A spike made of pure bone had stabbed straight in from Shirley's back and out through her chest. If the girl's body hadn't been toughened up by Dog's demonic symbiosis, she would have surely died right on the spot. Still, Shirley's body didn't fall and involuntarily stumbled forward instead. Alarmed and horrified, Dog promptly got in front of his partner to block the attackers who wanted to pursue, opening his mouth to spew a blast of corrosive black acid. This forced the enders to back off, leaving Shirley to lean in against the nearest wall for support. But that didn't matter for the enemy. The contamination was done on their part. Although a shadow demon's ability to resist corruption was high, Shirley was still mortal at her core. First, the muscle tissues would convulse and lose control, then it would be her mind's awareness until everything turns to darkness. XXXX, with so much effort, I only killed 3 of them. Shirley spat the excess blood and groaned at her pitiful state. It's not bad already, came Dog's equally pained and sluggish grunt. As the first line of defense for Shirley, the Dark Hound's condition was far more severe and affected. These enders are priest-level bastards, not the rabbles we mowed down in the basement of those Suntist gatherings. Us fighting them is equivalent to sieging the Storm Cathedral. It's not a loss at all. What XXX not a loss? They're a bunch of adults beating a harmless little girl and her dog. They're shameless bastards that only knows how to fight with numbers. Shirley still wanted to beat the enemies to a pulp if she could. There were 3 enders still standing in the room. All of them had turned into bloodied, deformed monsters that's more beast than man. And like a hunter to a prey, they most certainly wouldn't respond to Shirley's taunt. Knowing her words were useless, Shirley looked around the wrecked-up home with a sad face. The table got flipped, the cabinet smashed, her few pieces of clothes now ruined. Even the oil lamp, which was the only valuable piece of item in the home, was now destroyed. I only had this much and you've destroyed it all. Shirley deflated at seeing her only possessions ruined. Sliding down painfully against the wall, the girl started to tear up and sob. Bastards, I'll make sure to pummel you all bloody later. No answer came, though, only a volley of bone spikes. Then everyone slowed to a crawl as the projectiles flickered with phantom images in midair. A ball of green flame had suddenly materialized in the middle of the room, putting up a wall between the girl and her assailants. Our fighters are at war with the enemy, teleportation successful. From the intrusion came a hideous undead bird and a shrill voice that sounded oddly familiar. Chapter 185, Safe and Sound. The undead bird circled around the room before blowing up a vortex of flame with her body. Through this ethereal door, Duncan stepped through and came before Shirley. I remember telling you to ask for help when you are in trouble. Duncan lowered his head and quietly spoke to the girl covered in blood. Why didn't you look for me? I forgot. Shirley blinked, feeling a sense of relief as the buzzing noise evaporated from her head. Then, showing a tangled expression, I was very confused just now, that's right. These guys won't stop screeching in my ear with their weird prayers. It made me all dizzy. Slowly turning to glance at the attackers frozen in stasis, Duncan could fault the girl for losing her cool. It's the first time he had seen something this strange as well. They're more beast than human at this point. If not for the tattered clothes on their body, Duncan had every reason to believe they were actual monsters from a horror flick. Then Duncan frowned after recalling another detail. Were they the ones who hit you? Where did they all come from? They hit me, Shirley immediately proclaimed like a distraught child running home to tell her parents. It's weird, but that reaction came to her out of reflex. I don't know where they came from. Dog said they're Ender missionaries, the crazy bastards that worship subspace. Ender missionaries, people who worship subspace. Duncan didn't expect an encounter like this on a random night. Looking over to AI, who's still flying around the room, don't zap them yet. As he ordered, the few surviving Enders had already shown signs of being erased by Eye's powers, and how they're flickering like a shoddy TV signal. The network is connected. The network is connected. AI flutters back to reality and lands on Duncan's shoulder, her beak pecking the ghost captain in protest of interrupted work. All right, I get it. More fries for you later. First, send them to the ship instead, Duncan nodded to the dove. I'll pick them up on deck over there. Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. Giddy with joy, AI took to the air with hurricane speed and swept the Enders up with a green vortex that instantly spirited them away. Shirley was stunned to see what was happening in front of her. In fact, the battle ended so abruptly and strangely that it didn't feel real at all. Mr. Duncan didn't make a move at all. In fact, the man didn't care what tricks or special curses the Enders had from beginning to end. He just showed up here, and then, as if he had a slight interest in the group, he plucked them away like someone casually picking up a stone from the roadside. He may not have even realized that those cultists have combat power. How is your injury? At this moment, Duncan's voice suddenly came, interrupting Shirley's cranky thoughts. XXX, it hurts like hell. She grinned and waved at the guy, only to have her wound pulled and relapse into pain. Duncan made a concerned face. Do you want me to take you to the hospital? Don't, Shirley cried out instantly. I don't have any money. Duncan was dumbfounded. Is this a time to worry about money? You're already in that state. I didn't finish. Shirley finally sat up after much struggle. My physique is different from ordinary people's. I will definitely be discovered when I go to the hospital. If I attract the church's attention, I won't be able to explain it. You see, The girl raised her right arm to show Duncan the healing wound. After the curse was dispelled, the healing ability returned and quickly closed the gash. As for the heaviest injury on her back, it's healing too, but slowly and hurts like hell. As long as those Enders stop yapping, then I'm not afraid of them. Shirley glances down at the blood soaking her dress. They wouldn't have stood a chance otherwise. It hurts so much. A slight crackling sound suddenly came from nearby, interrupting Shirley's muttering. She and Duncan followed the noise simultaneously and found it's coming from one of the corpses in the room. The body had already been deformed and mutilated, but the grayish-white smoke fuming out of the corpse was alarming. Imagine a burning ember crackling and turning red from the heat. That's exactly what's happening to this corpse. Before they knew it, the entire body had disintegrated into a pile of ash before suddenly sinking into a black hole that manifested on the ground. The Enders dedicated themselves to subspace, and now it is their time to pay that price. Dog's hoarse voice answered the question from the side. Not even their ash will remain in this world. At least they're environmental when they die. No one has to clean up after them like the mess made by those scientists. Duncan throws out his thought without considering how poor of a joke his sentence was. Then looking down at the palish-looking Shirley. Are you feeling better now? If you are, come with me. After he said that, a cluster of dark green flames emerged out of thin air. Go with you? Shirley took a second to grasp the meaning. Where to? You're not going to spend the night here today, are you? Duncan raised his finger and pointed to the mess in the room. Do you think this place can still be inhabited? Shirley looked around the hut that she and Dog called home for many years. Everywhere she looked, it smashed furniture and debris from the fighting. There's nothing of value left in this place. The girl didn't say anything for a while, and only glumly looked down at the ground. The patrolling guardians don't seem to have noticed the commotion here. We can still pack your things if you want, Duncan sighed. He knew Shirley's mood couldn't be good, but there was nothing he could say to comfort her. But regardless, you can't stay here anymore. Even if you don't mind the broken furniture, we don't know if those Enders will revisit this place. You're a target to them now. Duncan didn't have the heart to continue. He knows Shirley was a child that's far more mature for her age due to the harsh environments she grew up in. "I will pack some stuff," Shirley said sullenly. "Need help?" Duncan asked. "No need," Shirley shook her head. "I have very little." Indeed, the girl had very little to pack. Duncan only waited for a short while before Shirley finished the task. A small tin box for carrying, a rag doll, and a few tattered clothes she had salvaged from the former closet. "We're taking all these, so we're not coming back in the future." Dog peeks up at the small tin box and sullenly asks, which doesn't get a response at all. Duncan knew he had to do something now after hearing that. Coming over to Shirley's side, he lowered himself to eye level and patted the girl's head in a comforting manner. Let's go home." A green fireball promptly shot out of the old-looking hut and soared through the night sky. Its destination, Duncan's antique shop. Chapter 186. Local products from the city-state. On the first floor of the antique shop, Nina sat anxiously in a chair next to the counter. From time to time, she would get up and peer out the window, searching through the empty streets with those eyes for signs of her uncle. "Oh, how can Uncle be like this? Why did he go out so late into the night? There's a curfew out." Nina sat back down and moped. "If the guardians on patrol find out, he will definitely be detained again." That's already not the first time she's muttering to herself like this. But then, the slight sound of movement came from the door, followed by the doorknob turning. Nina perked up immediately, looking up in the direction of the entrance with anticipation. Sure enough, the familiar figure had come into her view. "Nina, I'm back," Duncan said as he met his niece's gaze with a smile. "See, I'm not too late." Nina practically threw herself at Duncan's chest as she complained. "It's not too late. What time is it? Do you know how dangerous it is to go out past curfew? You just suddenly got up and said you're going out. You left me home alone." The girl's chattering complaints came out like a storm on the sea, forceful and continuous. However, her barrage swiftly halted after noticing the small figure hiding behind Duncan's leg. Shirley, carrying the small tin box, had peeked out with her head and waved at Nina nervously. "Nina, it's me." Relieved that he's found an opening, Duncan promptly closed the door behind them and slid to the side so the girls could speak. "Shirley, why are you here so late with Uncle? Wait, how come there's so much blood on you?" Nina's eyes widened in shock at the terrible state of her friend. "Ah, don't worry. Shirley hurriedly waved her hand to indicate it's nothing. Although the injury on her back hasn't completely healed yet, she still tries to portray a bright smile. "I encountered a small little problem. I'm perfectly fine." "That's not a small problem at all." Nina hurriedly took the small box from Shirley's hand and carefully examined the blood stains on the girl's body. Growing shocked at the number of wounds. You got so many injuries, we must find a doctor quickly." "I'm really okay, but calm down." Shirley quickly grabbed Nina's hand and showed a helpless expression. "Have you forgotten I'm not an ordinary person?" Nina wanted to say something, but her attention was interrupted by Duncan's following cough. Duncan interrupted the increasingly chaotic communication between the two girls. "Don't ask so much, Nina. Shirley's injury shouldn't be a problem. Go take her upstairs and shower and change out of her clothes. I'll explain the specifics later." Nina's gaze flickered between the two before the girl nodded in confusion. Meanwhile, Shirley was rubbing her stomach with a flushed face. Is there anything to eat? I'm really hungry." Normally, Shirley wouldn't have such a craving in the middle of the night, but perhaps it's due to the effect of her rapid recovery. She's feeling empty in the belly and drastically needs sustenance. "Ah, yes." Nina took a second to respond, but once she did, she promptly got to work. "I overcooked today, so there's still plenty of leftover from dinner. I'll go warm it up." Quickly running up the stairs, Nina's footsteps soon faded away from their ears as Shirley stood at the doorstep with a stunned face. She turned left and right, then up and down to see the familiar shelves, the familiar merchandise, and the smiling Mr. Duncan. "I'm back again," Shirley mutters softly after accepting this was her home from now on. "Yes, you're back." Duncan smiled and bent down to pick up Shirley's small tin box. "We'd better discuss how to explain your injuries while we have the chance now. We also need to come up with a reasonable excuse to have you stay here permanently. But don't fret about it. I believe Nina would love that arrangement, so you don't have to worry about her opinion." It took a good second for Shirley to realize what just happened with her possession. It's okay, I can do it myself." Meanwhile, on the vanished, Duncan, the infamous ghost captain, was staring at the three surviving Enders. They still hadn't regained consciousness, but the monstrous form they took had started to revert back to their human state. These twisted guys can become normal people again. Suddenly, a series of light footsteps rushed over from the rear. Alice was crying out happily in her gothic dress. "Captain, Captain, I just heard Mr. Goathead say you are sending something to the deck again. You bought more things from the city." Alice came to a jerking halt halfway through her sentence. Whatever excitement she showed had turned into puzzlement. "Captain, is this also a native product of the human city?" "Sort of," Duncan thought for a moment and shrugged. "I haven't encountered anything like them before, at least. They like to pop up in the city-state like sprouts during the spring season." Alice nodded in confusion, then scratched her hair again with even more confused. She didn't know what the man meant by sprouts growing during spring because she's never seen it. They should be human, right?" the puppet muttered. "Captain, what are you doing with 3 of these things? You probably didn't buy them, right?" "I didn't buy them. I picked them up from the roadside." Duncan casually coped with the fragmented thinking of the puppet while also paying attention to the 3 subspace believers who had almost completely returned to their human form. It seems that I's teleportation process is as reliable as ever. So, does this mean I can use AI to transport ordinary people to the ship in the future? Duncan contemplated the idea's feasibility and gradually grew happy at the other possibilities this opened. Aside from testing I's ability, Duncan had other plans in mind for other projects, like what the Vanished's environment would do to others, and what Alice's guillotine ability would do to living people if they got into contact now. What other better test subjects were there than these cultists, who just happened to drop into his lap tonight? He could only thank nature for the plentiful gifts he's gotten. While Duncan relishing at the good harvest, one of the Enders finally showed some movement. First, it was a slight twitch, then came the groan from the one that sat up. "You're awake," the gentle voice mixed in with the sea breeze stimulated the nerves of the alienated captive. "Here is," the cultist slowly turned his head, finding Duncan and Alice already staring down at him. Due to the sluggishness of his brain, the guy had to take a second to process the image, but once he did, the hostility instantly showed. "Who are you?" "Oh right, you haven't seen me before," Duncan laughed as he watched the other 2 Enders slowly recover as well. "Welcome to the Vanished. You can call me Captain Duncan." The Vanished? The first cultist was stunned because he obviously knew the name. This is the ghost ship that returned from subspace." "That's right, it seems that you understand the situation, then our communication will be simple." Duncan nodded. "First of all, I have some questions." His words did not get far because the cultist opposite to him had already raised both hands into the air, those eyes filled with ecstasy and madness. With a loud shout, "Oh, subspace, you have finally opened the door to me and the others. Eternal life in the last days, redemption in disaster, annihilation for rejuvenation. The Ark of Promise has come, the Ark of Promise has come." Duncan's face visibly twitched after that proclamation. What illness does this cultist have in his brain? Chapter 187, Ender Missionaries. The newly awakened subspace believers fell into an inexplicable state of ecstasy after learning they were on the Vanished. It's so wild that they even scared Alice with their fanatical behavior. Fortunately, Miss Doll had kept those hands on her head during this, so that part didn't fall off like usual. "The souvenirs this time are so scary." Miss Doll stared and kept hiding behind Duncan. "What's wrong with him?" How would Duncan know? He hasn't even finished asking this yet. Immediately afterward, the other 2 final Enders also woke up, and after they figured out the current situation, they fell into the same ecstasy as the first person. They began to yell frantically, saying stuff like the promised Ark. The gatekeeper of the subspace has come. Regardless of what Duncan and Alice said next to them, they remained unable to communicate. But by this time, Duncan had vaguely guessed the reason why these Enders fell into ecstasy. The Vanished was a ghost ship that returned from subspace. In the eyes of such madmen, the Vanished was likely a miracle. But isn't this fanatical energy a little too much? The 3 cultists kept hugging each other, both crying and laughing simultaneously. On occasion, they would even say something that should have been impossible to produce with a human throat before kissing and licking the deck. Their last action annoyed Alice, who was watching the excitement from the side. Without delay, Miss Doll grabbed the nearest mop and smashed one of the cultists' head. "I just washed the deck." Alice's fury did not go unnoticed. The 2 buckets and mops nearby also got into action and started to beat the fanatical lunatics on their own accord. Before long, the rowdy ruckus of mops and buckets was flying all over the deck. Duncan naturally became stunned as he watched this weird and chaotic scene. He knew Alice had built a good relationship with the items on the Vanished, but he didn't expect her one battle cry would be enough to raise an army. She's absolutely a boss with a bunch of henchmen. "Stop," he stepped forward and ordered before this farce got out of hand. The buckets and mops stopped, leaving only Alice to continue with a mop in hand. It's only after she gave one last kick before she huffed indignantly and walked away. "I just washed the deck, and now it's dirty from all their licking. Although I also think their action is a little disgusting, we still shouldn't do this." Duncan glanced at the doll helplessly and turned his attention back to the few cultists who had just been beaten to a pulp. "Calm down yet." Despite the beatings they just endured, the Enders did not flinch in the slightest and were still energetic with their creepy grin. For individuals with such thin and scrawny bodies, they sure have an astonishing level of tolerance for pain. "Haha, gatekeeper of the promised land, ghost captain at the helm, navigator of the Ark." The first Ender to regain consciousness seems to have come back to reality and spoke. I can see your heart. How sad, you have received the greatest blessing, yet you rejected his gift. You had the right to enter the promised land, but you rejected it. You fool." Duncan slightly frowned while Alice immediately came over from the side. "Captain, do you want me to beat him up again?" The bucket and mop next to her also jumped over and swayed behind Alice to support the idea. "All of you just behave over there for now." Duncan shooed them to the side and focused back on the Ender. "It sounds like you know me very well since you called me the Ghost Captain." "Subspace whispered your name, whispered your foolish refusal." The cultist grinned as the blood trickled down the corner of his mouth. "You have the qualifications to be the most blessed being. Why did you have to flee? Don't you know that subspace is the eternal and ultimate destination of all things? You've reached the end, so why did you turn back when you reached the end?" Duncan just quietly stared at this fanatic with an unwavering expression. However, his heart wasn't so calm, though. Instead, it's rising up and down like a tidal wave at the information he's just heard. This group of fanatics knows a lot. Perhaps they might even be right in some parts of their religion, and he mentioned Captain Duncan escaping from subspace. Rejecting the blessing. Could it be the real Captain Duncan actually didn't fall into madness and escaped at the last moment? So the rumors were wrong. If that's the case, when did the real Duncan lose his mind and die? Duncan suddenly remembered the goathead's attitude toward subspace. Wary, resistant, and faintly unnerved. This seems to confirm what this Ender mentioned about the great escape from subspace. Afterward, the Ender fell back into a daze, muttering something that couldn't be understood and laughing wildly in the next. As for the other two captives, they never regained their sanity to begin with. This told Duncan he would have a hard time talking with these individuals, likely even harder than the Suntists. Is it because of the influence of subspace? Or did they actively destroy their sanity to embrace subspace? After getting no further response for a while, Duncan figured he had to take the initiative and provoke a reaction. "Why did you attack Shirley?" Sure enough, the three cultists reacted to the question. One of them raised their head in confusion and began swaying as he answered. "Attack! Attack whom?" "What you just did." Duncan's voice was cold and heavy. "You attacked a girl with a hound. Why did you attack her?" "The attack, oh, attack." The confused fanatic suddenly started to shout. "We are merely setting everything back on track so that the correct history can progress smoothly. Loopholes, flaws, a little hidden danger. Hidden dangers must be ruled out. She should have died in the correct history. As long as she lives, loopholes will continue to sprout." The correct history? Listening to the crazy nonsense of these cultists was definitely having an effect on Duncan's brainpower. Nevertheless, he's able to capture the key detail and press for more. "There is a problem with the historical line of plan. Were you people responsible for it?" "Something went wrong. No problem at all. We're just getting everything back on track." The madman raised his face with martyrdom in his eyes. "The world should get back on track. The fate of destruction has been postponed for too long, and everyone has rebelled against the gift from subspace, against the destiny that should have come. We are correcting history to the right trajectory." "Correct history to the right trajectory." The other two Enders began to shout feverishly as if being infected by their peers' worship. "Only when we return to the right history line will everything be destroyed. Through the end comes renewal. Subspace will devour everything, and subspace will reshape everything anew. The fire has been extinguished, but the embers are ready for ignition. Only by lighting a second bonfire can the world survive in that gift." Chapter 188. The Crazy Man. The clues seem to have all connected now. There are traces of pollution in the history of planned. Distorted and closed space-time junction points in the chapel of the 6th block. and a subspatial rift hidden in the statue head of the storm goddess. Shirley was one of those who remembers the fire from that year. She should have died like everyone else when it burned, but she merged with a dark hound and survived. As a result, the girl escaped the historical pollution and retained her true memory. Now, a group of Enders has attacked Shirley to correct the flawed loophole. Of course, Duncan wouldn't believe the absurd truth from their mouths, and even listening to their crap about correcting history was only to lure out more information. However, there's one thing he's certain of: these fanatical Enders are definitely the culprits behind the whole false history. But not all problems have been explained yet, though. How did these madmen suddenly discover Shirley's loophole? What does historical pollution have to do with the Black Sun, and what role did that sun god play in this matter? And most importantly, will Nina, the carrier of a suspected solar fragment, also be targeted by these cultists? Duncan observed the three crazy fanatics with cold eyes as he raised a finger. A cluster of green flame ignited upon one of the Enders. This flame burned the cultist's body, which could be regarded as a transcendent object, causing him to curl up in agony as he screamed. This also had the direct effect of silencing the other two cultists. Fire, blasphemous fire! The cultist's eyes widened with a fanatical frenzy crazier than before. This subspace follower who never showed fear before had finally learned what terror meant. Blasphemy, blasphemy, oh blasphemy! If you don't want to get burned, then cooperate with my questioning. Duncan orders the flames to ignite all over the deck, intertwining into a web of flame to surround the three cultists. Answer me, how exactly did you people pollute history? Did it start in the 6th block? We are putting history back on track. Even though they were intimidated by the ghost flames, the Enders did not forget to retort and even shouted defiantly. The 6th block was just a failed attempt, but that's nothing. The 6th block was just a failed attempt. Duncan immediately frowned at this word. The other party did not answer honestly, but still revealed some vital information. First of all, the fire that year was indeed the doings of this group of subspace fanatics. It wasn't simply a fire caused by the sun fragment as he had thought at the beginning. Secondly, these cultists' attempts to pollute history did not seem to have gone as intended, or at least not yield the full result they wanted. Immediately after that, he thought of another key year number, 1885. Vanna found the number under the chapel, pointing to the year when the nun died in battle. So, in theory, it should also be the year when the church was invaded by subspace forces. Then there's the 1889 Great Fire. Between the initial corruption and the outbreak, there's a 4-year gap in between. It took that much time for the Enders to produce that failed attempt. Things are starting to make sense for him, with a clear picture of the truth. You actually failed twice, Duncan said, gazing down at the Ender who was being burned by the ghostly flames. In 1885, you guys invaded a chapel and tried to use it as an anchor point to spread the pollution of history, but a nun ruined your plans with her life, sealing up both that year's invasion and her own death in the underground church. 4 years later, in 1889, you carried out a second plan to create a fire in the 6th block where the chapel is located, trying to blanket reality with a historical branch of the city-state being engulfed by a huge fire. But that failed as well because an unknown force erased that reality. It did not continue to burn. Then you guys lurked in the city to this today, looking for an opportunity to continue the plan until you discovered Shirley's loophole. You believed the plan's failure back then was related to her survival, so you wanted to get rid of this hidden danger first, correct? Instead of answering or lashing at Duncan's speculation or truth, the burning Ender only made a creepy grin under that intense, searing pain. You don't have to answer. I can see the answer in your eyes, the resentment, which means I'm right. Duncan didn't care about the other person's provocation and calmly continued. Next question, what is the connection between you and that black sun? The fire of 1889 was sparked by a sun fragment. You made that fragment. The Enders remained silent and didn't answer. Duncan became even more forceful and spread his flame onto the other two Enders. He watched as they curled up and twitched from the pain that could burn even their souls. If you won't speak, then I can only guess, Duncan sighed, waving his hand to disperse the flames. He had realized that this simple torturing method wouldn't work on these subspace fanatics. Their spirits and flesh are no longer human, meaning the simple definition of pain no longer applies to them. I guess you have some sort of cooperation with those suntists. No, wait, maybe there is a partnership with the heirs of the sun. They promised your group something in return for the collaboration. Duncan paused, hoping for a response, and got none. In the early days of the new city-state calendar, there once existed a city-state called Wilhelm that no one knew about. The name left on the flame-bearer's pillar was its only evidence of existence. You guys summoned the Black Sun from history and succeeded there, so the process to summon it is to pollute history, right? Duncan's imagination and memory were at their greatest when all the trivial clues and lines were put together. Things that were once incomprehensible and bizarre before now looked like concrete facts, and he's now certain he's getting closer than ever to the whole story. Ordering the ghostly flames to converge, he forms a circle to jail these three as he peered down at them menacingly. There should be more than a few of you who have infiltrated the city-state. Where are the others hiding? What are you going to do next? Continue to eliminate what you call loopholes? Or is it waiting for an opportunity to set off more pollution? Still refusing to answer, Duncan's questions were thrown out one by one, and finally one of the cultists caved. The skinny maniac slowly flicked his lips into a snarling grin while slurring the words. We are not hitting in these so-called city statty. We are hitting in this cooest, tea-twisted, long-overdue history. Ween it beejins. It won't end what the flame-bearers can't do, you can't do, Mr. Captain. The grin on this cultist's mouth became deeper and deeper to the point it's derogatory. I just saw it now, your humanity, it's really dazzling. Where did you pick it up from? Duncan's eyes immediately got ugly as he stomped forward. What do you mean? Have a nice day, Mr. Captain. The Ender seemed to have flicked a switch there and became a well-mannered citizen instead of the batshit crazy fanatic from earlier. Ah, the promised land, the promised ark. Chapter 189, Alice's Test. After that, Duncan never heard anything of value anymore from these Enders. All he got was their idiotic grin and silence while they took in the fresh, salty air of the boundless sea. Nevertheless, the damage was done, and Duncan could no longer forget the last comment made by one of the captives about his humanity. Did they figure out the original Duncan is gone, and someone else had taken over this shell? And these cultists mentioned they were not hiding in the city-state, but in a cursed history. What does that mean? Could it be that these crazy Enders are not usually in the normal time and space, but rather hiding in another dimension? Duncan stared uncomfortably at these delirious fanatics, his mind rising up and down as he checked his ship for any changes. He's worried something might have happened without his knowledge. The goat head was still honestly driving the helm in the captain's room. That's good news. He didn't seem to be paying any attention to the deck, so it's unlikely the statue overheard the conversation. As for the other parts of the ship, everything's operating as usual without any strange anomalies. Now that leaves only Alice sitting on a large wooden barrel not far away with her head in hand. Miss Dahl was obviously a little bored before and had taken the liberty to comb her hair. After an unknown amount of time, Duncan finally exhaled a soft sigh after finding nothing. He's obviously wasted enough time on these cultists and was starting to get affected by their crazy words. I have already obtained a lot of useful information from these people. Any more time will only be wasted. Exactly then, one of the Enders froze again as if a switch got flipped. He looked up into the illusory sail above and spoke in a hallucinatory voice. Is it time to disembark? There is no place for you on this ship to begin with. Duncan glared at the captive with a deadpan expression. But you can still come in handy before I throw you overboard. Instead of unsettling the three Enders, the ghost captain's words only excited them with that creepy grin. Honestly, it unnerved even Duncan, who's fully in control of the situation. Alice, come here. Skillfully popping her head back on, Alice trotted to the ghost captain's side. Captain, you called me. Can you not pull your head off in the future? Your joints aren't good to begin with. If you keep removing your head, the connection will only get worse with time. Also, your intellect drops whenever you do that. Duncan lectures with a frown. I'm going to conduct a test now, so stop it. Test? Alice was stunned for a moment. What test? To see if your uncontrolled guillotine ability is still there. Duncan raised an eyebrow. Don't tell me you've forgotten about it. I forgot, Alice nodded reasonably. I just remembered it as soon as you reminded me. Then she ignored the subtle changes in Duncan's expression and greeted the three Enders. Hello, I forgot to introduce myself just now. My name is Alice, and I'm the ship's cook. You should tell them about your other identity, Duncan said lightly. But as he spoke, he didn't forget to catch the reaction from the three cultists. It's Anomaly 99. The eyes of the three Enders finally showed a huge change, and not for the better either. I thought you were all numb to the point of not being afraid of dying. Duncan smirked mischievously. I hope you madmen can enjoy my next arrangement for you all. What I want is simple. Stay near Alice and survive or die by beheading. Alice suddenly leaned over and muttered after hearing that. Captain, you really look like a villain when you speak like that. In amazement, Duncan faced the puppet. Which side are you on? Death means nothing to us. One of the final Enders finally spoke while the two were discussing. It's just one more pause in the long journey. You stupid fools who have rejected the gift of subspace, obsessed with the obstructions of the real world, can never know the truth beyond life and death. Duncan quickly tugged at Alice's arm. Did you hear that? This is what you call a villain. Alice nodded. Oh. Duncan then looks up at the glowing rift in the night sky. How long have these guys been aboard so far? It's been hours, right? Alice thought for a while. My sense of time is quite accurate. A few hours, in other words, the guillotine's effective timing must have passed at least once. Duncan mused over what this implied. But no matter, we can conduct the next round of testing. The next round of testing? Alice blinked in confusion. How are we going to test them? Well, we can roughly be certain your guillotine ability has not taken effect yet. Whether that's due to the vanished or me being present is another matter, Duncan said as he swept his gaze across the three captives. After confirming their heads were still in place, in a few hours, after confirming another cycle had passed, I want you and these three to leave the vanished for a while. Alice became shocked at the plan. Temporarily leave the vanished, where to? Miss Dahl promptly looked around the terrain and saw nothing but endless water around them. There's not a single piece of land in sight. Duncan didn't actually iron out that detail in his grand scheme. His initial plan was to have the group keep some distance from the ship and from a populated landscape to avoid unintended casualty. There are a few lifeboats on the side, and they're all in good condition. I'll put one down and you can ride aboard one of them during the experiment. Duncan stared into Alice's eyes. Don't worry, all you're doing is floating out at sea for a while. I'll have the vanished waiting nearby and won't leave you behind. Miss Dahl immediately shrunk her neck at the unreliable arrangement. Do I have to drift across the sea again? I had psychological trauma for the first time, and the view of the sea is so poor at night. What if you lose me? What if a gust of wind causes a wave to sweep the lifeboat away? What if the boat capsized? Duncan didn't wait for the humiliating puppet to finish before interrupting her. Stop, stop. As if there are so many what-ifs. I'll have AI hover overhead to keep an eye on you, okay? But then again, what are you afraid of? When I threw you overboard the first time, you actually used your box as a raft to row back aboard. Even 8 cannonballs couldn't keep you away back then. Alice's nagging immediately sauntered at the reminder. Nevertheless, the doll kept peering out at the boundless sea with worry. If that's what you say, Captain, but don't lose me. Duncan, why do I get the feeling that this doll is getting more and more useless the longer she stays aboard the ship? She's nothing like the wave-riding surfer the first time we met. Chapter 190, Gone like yesterday. With the giant rift known as the world's creation hanging overhead, the cold breeze of the ocean blowing against her skin, and the constant waves finally battering against the rowboat's side, Alice felt like she was in a dream. Of course, she didn't really know what a dream was since she had been asleep for so long. However, if she had to guess, this would be how it would feel to her if she were human, floating in a big, big place, her thoughts drifting away with the currents driving her to a different world. Oh, there's also the 3 Enders sitting across from her in the vessel, but that's unimportant since they're tied up like dumplings at the moment. From her view, these are very bad people, the worst of the worst. Alice didn't know any humans so far, but if she did, Miss Dahl most certainly wouldn't want to be friends with these folks. Are you afraid? After holding back for a decent amount of time, Alice finally couldn't resist starting a conversation. She's really uncomfortable sitting here by herself without anyone to talk to. Although she knew this was a safety test that had to be done before she operated in the human city, it's still unsettling to be off the vanished parked not far away in the distance. Stupid filth, clumsy shell. One of the Enders responded to the puppet's voice, his thin skeleton-like head slowly raised and stared into Alice's eyes. Your soul is pale and empty, and subspace will not take in. Alice was stunned by the rude response and took a moment to react. Hey, don't be rude to others. Unfazed, the Ender on the opposite side only let out a mirth of horse, an ugly laughter that frightened Miss Dahl even further. Sulking at being disrespected, Alice shook her head to get rid of the bad mood. I'm not angry anymore. This caused the second Ender to glance up inquiringly. I shouldn't be angry since you can only protest like this. After all, it is you who is tied up and not me, and it is you who have to do this head-dropping test, not me. Captain said, One mustn't get carried away when you are riding the wind, otherwise you will capsize in the end. Despite the Enders acting all quiet and indifferent, the dolls still managed to catch the subtle changes in their body language. They were exchanging silent looks and moving their necks from time to time. This gives the impression that they're wondering why their heads are still intact. At least in Alice's eyes, that's how they were behaving. "Actually, I am a little afraid," Alice said suddenly. "I'm afraid your heads will suddenly fall off. Captain said I could decapitate people, which startled me because humans don't have the same ability as me. Their heads can't go back on afterward." Suddenly, the sound of flapping wings came from above and caught Alice's eye. She could tell it's AI who had come to check on her. Next thing the doll knew, AI had dropped a gorgeous wooden box next to the boat. "My box!" Alice cried out in surprise, and immediately imagined the picture of being swept out of her home. However, she quickly noticed a small note sticking to the top. "The guillotine ability may also be related to your wooden box. Sent it for resting. Also, stop imagining you're going to be kicked off the ship again." Alice flipped the note up and down, and couldn't understand what's written there. She's illiterate. But soon she saw something else on the back of the note, a scrawled stick figure of her rowing back to the Vanished with a smiling face at the end. That she understood. At ease now, Alice casually fished the wooden box out of the water with her hand and threw it next to herself. Then turning to face the cultist sitting across from herself. "Are you hungry?" Naturally, Miss Doll didn't expect a response and only asked out of courtesy. Although Captain said that you are people that deserve to die, he also said that he won't kill you if you can complete the test. He will instead send you back to the city-state, and then, what's it called? The puppet lady was a little stuck as she tried to recall the wording. "Oh, to show the concern of an enthusiastic citizen worried for the city's safety. He said you're worth at least 7 bikes. What is a bicycle?" "Subspace will feed us. Subspace will give us peace. Subspace will bless the perished after all life comes to the promised end." One of the Enders muttered randomly as if to answer Alice's rambling. "We are walkers of the end, abandoning our cursed flesh and blood for the promise. Our minds are open and await the new world." That confused Alice. "What are you talking about?" No response came, though, only a boring one-person conversation between Alice and her box. She couldn't be any happier when dawn finally came. Best of all, she didn't behead anyone. Letter 1E5D. "Why, it's dawn. You are still alive. We can go back now." The celebratory words didn't affect the 3 captives, but the glimmer of light did. They looked up and made a creepy grin. "Oh, our day is over." The madman sighed softly and slowly turned his head to meet Alice's perfect jewel eyes. "Doll, we will meet again someday." Alice was stunned. "What do you mean by that? You can't just escape into thin air." Unfortunately, Miss Doll had spoken too soon. As the morning glow spread, the Enders' bodies were silently disappearing, fading into nothingness like phantoms of yesteryears. Alice popped her eyes in literal bafflement. Did they really just escape into thin air? Chapter 191, Alternate History. After listening to the messy description of this embarrassing puppet, Duncan widened his eyes in astonishment. "Disappeared, just disappeared out of thin air before your eyes." Duncan stared at Alice dumbfoundedly. Then shifting his gaze onto the rowboat that had just been hoisted up, he saw the ropes still left from the Enders just lying there on the plank. "That's right, they were gone all at once. Not even a sound." Alice gestured to Duncan about her bizarre experience. "The moment the sun's light hit them, they disappeared as if they never existed." "The moment the sun shines on them," Duncan frowned. He had imagined countless ways for those Enders to escape or resist, but he didn't expect the other party to disappear out of thin air, which made many of his preparations useless. "I can understand them even if they jump into the sea. At least they are soluble in water, but how are they able to dissolve in sunlight? Could it be related to the sun? Does the sun's exorcising ability make it impossible for them to survive in the real world?" "I don't know," Alice righteously states with her head held high. "I wasn't asking you," Duncan glanced at the doll. "Then what happened before they disappeared? What did they all say? Or did they do some weird ritual?" "They just kept chanting weird stuff about subspace, the promised land, the destined reincarnation of the last rebirth or something." Alice rubbed her head before abruptly recalling another detail. "They said another day is over." Duncan's brows instantly furrowed up into a knot. He hadn't forgotten what one of the Enders said to him before on the deck. They hid in a cursed history. He's had some outrageous theories before, but compared to his own theories, the world's truth seems to be even more outrageous. "Captain," Alice got worried after seeing the expression on Duncan's face, Do you have something in mind? It's nothing, Duncan shook his head as if talking to himself. It's just that I got this crazy idea. What if those Enders are from a different historical timeline? Different timeline? Alice was stunned despite having limited brain capacity and knowledge. What does that mean? Don't ask. It's hard for me to explain to you clearly with my intelligence. Duncan glanced at Alice, hesitated for 2 seconds, and shook his head. It's just that I suddenly understood one thing, why the book that Morris gave me said that the Ender missionaries are the most mysterious cultist in this world and the most difficult to discover and capture. This is so outrageous. Hiding in the offshoot branch of history, removing themselves from reality during the day and night cycle. If both points are true, how is one supposed to ever capture these fanatics? One night you could arrest them by setting a trap, the following morning and they're gone like a phantom. Is it because they're followers of subspace, that they can remove themselves from the main timeline, blessings of subspace? Captain, you're in a daze again. Alice eyed the captain with a nosy face. I'm okay. Duncan sighed softly and ditched the jumbled thoughts. Brainstorming too early wouldn't do him any good. Did you see the note I gave you? He said casually to the doll. I did, Alice nodded happily. I was shocked when I first saw the box. I thought you were telling me not to go back, but then I was relieved when I saw the note. I couldn't read the words on it, though. Good thing you drew some pictures in the back. The corners of Duncan's mouth visibly twitched as his heart cried. You really can't read. That's right, I can't read. Alice was as straightforward as ever. I have been lying in the box for so many years. It is already good enough that I managed to have some common sense. How am I supposed to recognize words? Duncan. Captain, what are you thinking? I suddenly had an idea. I wonder if it's feasible to run a cram school on the Vanished or the Antique Shop. Duncan sighed. Counting you, I already know 2 illiterate people, and if we count Dog, there are 3 enough to form a study group. Alice mused over the idea. What is cram school? What is a study group? I'll explain it later. Duncan waved his hand, then his expression became slightly more serious. Let's talk about the previous test. Those 3 cultists were all fine before they disappeared, right? Including after sending the box over, they were not affected in any way. I think so. Their heads were still on their necks. Duncan rubbed his chin in thought after getting the confirmation. Although the characteristics of those Enders are strange, they certainly do not have the strength or extraordinary resistance of saints. After all, Shirley can smash 3 people at once when she swings with Dog as a weapon, which shows that their flesh and blood are also conventional substances that can be destroyed. At most, their tolerance to pain is far beyond ordinary people's. And now the 3 Enders managed to survive Alice's company. Does this mean her guillotine effect is really gone? Alice watched the change in Duncan's face. No matter how slow she was, the doll was still smart enough to know what this implied for her future. Captain, did my test pass? Can you take me to the city-state? The test, should have. Although the weird characteristics of those final Enders still make me uneasy, the results, though. Duncan spoke slowly because he was still thinking and deliberating, but he finally nodded. All right, the test is fine. Your guillotine ability seems to be under control. He paused, and before Alice could celebrate, he added, I will take you to the city-state, but not immediately. This is because you seriously lack an understanding of what humans consider common sense. Also, there are still exposed spots on your body, such as your fingers and wrist joints. The former will need some more, but the latter needs a disguise. I know, Alice nodded vigorously. She didn't seem to be frustrated by the difficulties and problems mentioned by Duncan, but rather motivated instead. Mr. Goathead also told me about this. He said that the human world is very complicated. Even going out to buy a vegetable has a lot of rules. I will work hard and make up for my deficiencies by learning a lot and asking a lot of questions. Don't ask him. Duncan didn't wait for Alice to finish and cut her off. He's sweating just merely at the thought of Alice learning from that statue. Who knows what sort of knowledge the goat head might install into this clueless doll if he's not looking. He's just as bad as you when it comes to common sense. You learning about human society from him? Where's your brain? Alice looked all innocent. I don't have one. Duncan almost couldn't breathe at that answer. For the longest time, he couldn't muster the energy to speak. I admit that you are right. He. In short, don't learn anything from that statue in the future. He can't teach you anything good. Duncan sighed at the lack of helping hands aboard the ship. I'll put aside some time to teach you in the future. I'll also come up with a plan to disguise your joints. Now that there's nothing for you to do, let's cook something up for breakfast. Ooh, Alice nodded vigorously, but just as she was about to walk away, she seemed to recall something. So what are you going to do, Captain? I have something to discuss with Goathead. Duncan tiredly waved his hand. Something that has nothing to do with you. Alice nodded and turned in the direction of the kitchen in a good mood. Her steps were brisk and dignified after a whole night of work. She's so elegant when she doesn't open her mouth. Pity her character is so silly, Duncan sighed at the doll's back. Chapter 192, The Promised Ark. As always in the mapping room, sunlight from the boundless sea spills into the room through the portholes, reflecting the old objects that have experienced a century's worth of time as they sit here. Mr. Goathead was no different, sitting in the corner of the table and driving the Vanish towards a projected route with planned as its final destination. The door swung open then, and Duncan's figure appeared at the doorway, causing the wooden sculpture to immediately creak its neck in that direction. Ah, it is your excellency, the great captain, who has come to his loyal first mate. Are you still doing well? You've been busy since yesterday. Are you in a good mood today? The weather. Stop and stop. Similar greetings don't have to be repeated several times a day. Duncan raised his hand to interrupt before the other party could finish speaking. Then his gaze seemed to inadvertently linger on the face of Goathead for a moment. The fellow was, as always, expressionless, and the obsidian eyes were still strangely cold. However, they no longer gave the ghost captain the evil presence as it watched this side from the mapping table. In fact, the sculpture behaved well and gave him the impression of a hardworking sailor driving the ship. Your Excellency, Captain, you seem to be preoccupied. The voice of Goathead sounded again with a familiar bootlicking enthusiasm. You seem to have taken some captives and returned, but they don't seem to be on the ship anymore. They disappeared as soon as the sun rose, Duncan said lightly as he plodded down behind the mapping table. A few Enders. Ah, the Ender missionaries, troublesome and dangerous fellows they are, difficult to catch and always scurrying within the shadows. Goathead immediately started rambling after the topic got opened. This wooden sculpture had never been one to stay quiet for long despite Duncan's vexation. But how did they provoke you? Those crazy Enders don't usually show up in the open. At least compared to the Suntists and Annihilators, they are low-key and rare. They attacked a human I was keeping tabs on and captured them to test Alice's ability, Duncan said casually as he observed Goathead's reaction. They also said a lot of things related to subspace. How much do you know about these cultists? If you may permit me, Captain, but I advise against paying too much attention to their crazy preaching, Mr. Goathead advises immediately. Just frequently calling out the name of subspace may attract dangerous attention, let alone dealing with the kind of madman who worships subspace. Of course, such a great being as yourself may not be affected, but it is still not a good thing regardless. Then it paused and spoke more cautiously. I can tell you this, though, I don't know much about those madmen, and not many people in this world know about them either. The Enders should be regarded as the most eccentric group among all cultists. They are good at being elusive, their thinking is fragmented, and they don't have a large number of low-level rabbles like the Suntists. They are much fewer in numbers, and no one can properly communicate with them. Mr. Goathead went on and on until the conversation started to get off topic. Nevertheless, Duncan still got enough to pick up on the key details from the barrage. According to Mr. Goathead, the number of Enders out there was far less than that of the other two big cult forces, i.e., the Suntists and Annihilators. And judging from the current records, their number may only be 1,000 or even less. There are a large number of ordinary people in the general cult forces as bottom believers. These rabbles have little power but everyday social life, except that their thinking has been corrupted. Bluntly said, they are basically no different from ordinary folks. On the contrary, the Enders do not have such a bottom structure. As long as they appear, they must be priests with great power. No one knows how a cult group operated and survived to this day without the support of the bottom ranks, just as no one knows the specific conversion process of those Suntists and Annihilators among ordinary folks. In addition, the Enders may have the word missionaries in their name, but by no means do they spread their teachings. Sure, they like to chant about the truth of subspace and all that. It's unheard of for anyone to be converted to become an Ender. At least not a case that's been recorded. In other words, it was theoretically impossible for Enders to increase their number by preaching. Lastly, the Enders are extremely difficult to catch. In this regard, Duncan has already experienced it firsthand. A group of Enders who are so insane that they can't preach, Duncan muttered thoughtfully as he rubbed his chin. Where did the original Ender missionaries come from then? Who knows? The neck of Mr. Goathead creaked and swayed. Maybe they grew directly from subspace. Duncan didn't mind the obvious joke there, nor did he want to mention the alternate timeline theory. Right now, he's wondering why no one has come up with this theory besides himself, or maybe there has been people within the city-states. It would explain the weird coming and goings of those Enders. Captain, you seem to be very concerned about those Enders. In the silence, the voice of Mr. Goathead suddenly broke the silence in the room. It's rare to see you showing such a serious expression. Duncan raised his head and glanced quietly at the wooden sculpture. You say if the history of an entire city-state is polluted, can it still be saved? He said suddenly with the frank and casual tone of someone discussing an academic subject. The wooden sculpture was stunned for a moment, although it's hard to tell with a face that's expressionless, and it took 2 or 3 seconds before he responded. Historical pollution? Oh, this is a high-end topic. It sounds like something that can only be done in subspace. Can only be done in subspace? Duncan raised his eyebrows. Why do you say that? Except for subspace, which is a dangerous thing that is chaotic in its own time and space. What else can casually pollute the history of a city-state? Goathead said casually. There is nothing in the world that has such power. Oh, wait, I can't exactly say there's nothing actually. If you consider the thing hanging in the sky, then that's another. Duncan's heart literally jolted at the new info. The space-time continuum of subspace itself is chaotic. That's the first time I've heard of this. No book from Nina's school ever mentioned such a fact. Then a vivid picture once again popped up in his head. It's the words the Frost Queen said to himself during that trip into the past. Please do not contaminate history. He frowned and suppressed the complicated thoughts in his heart for the time being. Then, returning his gaze to the wooden sculpture, who also noticed the captain's gaze, stopped yapping and reacted. Ah, no wonder you suddenly paid attention to those Enders. Could it be that They're probably doing a big job, Duncan said darkly, and it's making me a little annoyed. He looked quietly into the eyes of Goathead, and the wooden sculpture did the same with that obsidian bead eyes. However, no information was gained by either partner through this visual contact. The city-state has its own protectors, and the flame-bearers are constantly watching the context of history, Mr. Goathead began. Anyways, those Enders can't threaten you no matter how much commotion they raise. Even if they pollute history, they can't pollute the vanished or you. Duncan raised his eyebrows. Can't pollute the vanished and me. We returned from subspace, Captain, said Goathead slowly. Everything in the world can be polluted except for subspace. We've been in subspace long enough. Duncan frowned harder, and for some reason, some crazy words that the Enders had said suddenly appeared in his mind. After a moment of silence, he couldn't help but mumble softly, The Promised Ark. Chapter 193, Captain. Listening to Goathead's words, Duncan started to ponder some more. However, he doesn't get to think long before the wooden sculpture interrupts him. Captain, you are beginning to be interested in things within mortal civilization. Before this, you had always been focused on sailing beyond the borders. Is there something in the city-state that might have interested you? Sailing beyond the border. Duncan's heart slightly thumped, but the expression on his face remained unchanged as he replied casually. It's just a simple concern. No reason is needed. Ah, well, you're the captain. You have the final say, Goathead replied immediately. Then it went quiet for several seconds before whispering as if hesitating or thinking about something. Just in case, I want to ask you a question. Duncan raised his eyebrows as he heard the deep, menacing voice from within the wooden sculpture. Name. Duncan Abnommer. Duncan was expressionless as he replied. Then out of reflex, he actually chuckled at the rhetorical question. Actually, I'm curious what would happen if I said something else. It was the first time he had asked this question, and it was his darest overstep to date. The life he's had on the ship, his many encounters with Goathead, and his growing understanding of his own powers and characteristics are all the things that propelled him to take this tentative step. Goathead fell into a long silence after this question, and it was only after a full minute before its low, hoarse voice sounded again in the captain's room. Then try not to tease me so much, Captain. The Vanished still needs you to steer it. Duncan bellowed out a laugh. As he thought, Goathead had seen through his camouflage long ago and only remained ignorant. Being the first mate that's been with the real Captain Duncan for the past century, this wooden sculpture likely knew more about the captain than the man himself. Under those circumstances, how could a newcomer that just came out of nowhere fool someone that close? There must be a reason for not breaking the thin sheet of ignorance, but what? Was it a necessity? Or a rule aboard that must be followed? Perhaps the Vanished merely needed a Captain Duncan, and whoever played this role no longer mattered. Duncan didn't bring these questions to the forefront, of course. He's just a little curious about why it would be himself, and whether the fact that he's here was unplanned. According to the general assumption, wouldn't it be better to find someone that's actually cursed to be helming a cursed ship? A person like that would surely make a better candidate as the captain, and clearly he's not cursed. You still need your loyal first mate to serve you, and the Vanished still needs a great captain to steer itself. What do you think? The voice of Goathead came from the side, sounding a little expectant and even eager. Duncan turned his head and stared into the other party's obsidian-bead eyes. Of course, he said with a smile. Then he stood up and walked to the door of the captain's room. I'm going to leave first. You take care of the ship. Of course, your loyalty first mate will wait for you here. I wish you all the luck. Goathead had returned to his bootlicking attitude as before with that cheerful tone. Duncan had pushed the door out of the room, blocking out the words behind his back. Here, standing on the aft of the deck, he sighed softly and swung around to read the letters inscribed on the frame of the door of the Lost. A sense of calming ease filled his heart for the first time ever. He's no longer worried about being exposed, fearing being expelled from the ship, and no longer worried about losing his life. Reaching out, he grabbed the handle and gently pushed forward, stepping through and into the murky fog. Back inside the captain's room, Goathead had sensed Duncan's departure at the same time. He didn't make a scene, only silently sitting on the mapping table while subtle creaking sounds were coming from the ship and its items aboard. Oh, Mama, he didn't get angry, right? He shouldn't be angry. He definitely didn't get angry. He shouldn't be. Eventually, Goathead broke the silence with a rather nervous and anxious voice. The various subtle noises in the room became more pronounced. I know, it's not that I have to ask for the name 3 to 5 times per day, but isn't this for the safety of the voyage? What if we suddenly fall back into subspace? At least we will be prepared that way. Quit arguing, I'm still a mess inside, if not, you ask. If you guys won't then quit making a ruckus, you also know it on the entire ship, only I have a mouth. The doll, you're not sick, right? How could she know about the situation? Wait, when did you guys get so good with her? Is it because you're all constantly fighting and bullying her too much? That's why you guys are feeling guilty. Okay, everyone back to work. Focus on the voyage. Who knows when the captain will return? He may ask about the progress when he returns. Anchors, can you learn to paddle? Whipping around will somewhat provide some power. Maybe you can imitate a propeller found on those steamships. Okay, fine, pretend I didn't say anything. If not, have both lifeboats jump down and push. Okay, pretend I didn't say anything. The various noises in the captain's room gradually dissipated, and the wooden sculpture returned to its focused state of driving the ship towards planned. Meanwhile, on the foggy mapping chart, the city-state's shimmering point of light was gradually getting closer and closer. Zhou Ming pushed open the door of the bachelor apartment and walked back into his original world again. The window was still shrouded by fog outside, and everything remained the same as he had left it. There's nothing out of the ordinary, only the computer screen shimmering with the prompt, "Network not connected," popping up repeatedly in the lower right corner. He sighed and walked to the shelf at the end of the room. The miniature model of the Vanished was still lying quietly in the lattice where he had last placed it. Zhou Ming picked up the vivid model of the ghost ship, opened the door of the captain's room, and peered inside. The sailing table was still empty, and Goathead could not be seen inside. Zhou Ming thought for a while, placing the Vanished back in its place, then turned to sit at the desk. He needed to sort out the information he had learned. But suddenly, his gaze was drawn to something on the desk. Strictly speaking, not something, but a phenomenon. He saw some very, very tiny flames constantly jumping on the empty table. The flames were like tiny sparks. Under the outline of these faint and light green flames, some faint images were flickering in and out. Gradually, his expression grew serious because he recognized some of the outlines portrayed by the dancing flames. That's a neighborhood of planned. He could even discern some details of the coastline. The fire was burning, and Zhou Ming remembered the order he gave to the flame when he sent it out to hunt and chase that thing with the black umbrella. Now it has spread to almost all corners of the city-state. Prey is everywhere. Zhou Ming's brows furrowed a little. He thoughtfully tracked and distinguished the trajectory of the spread, looking for the law of their gathering and the direction in which they might converge next, just like a hunter tracking the smell of his prey. Chapter 194, Transmit. Vanna had returned to the archives yet again. Although she didn't know why she even wanted to return here in the first place, an inexplicable sense of discord and crisis urged her to recall the details of rummaging through the materials here. She's forgotten something crucial, and she didn't know what. Of course, another reason for returning was that there's nowhere else to go anyway. Due to the growing connection with the vanished, she was now effectively in a state of constant surveillance. She's still the inquisitor of the city-state of Planned, but only because there wasn't anyone to replace her important duties at the moment. Therefore, she must always remain within the cathedral except for the essential required attendance outside. Under these circumstances, Vanna's only option was to look for a distraction. As it so happens, the archives were an excellent way to block off the outside variables. As she stepped through the empty archives, only the rows of lumbering bookshelves accompanied her footsteps. However, she's not alone here, though. Not far behind her, a middle-aged priest had kept tabs on the lady with the lantern in hand, exuding a warm and soft glow to repel evil. Finally, Vanna stopped at the section supposedly containing the materials pertaining to 1889 and 1885. She had rummaged through the records before, found the suspicious clues of sporadic heretical sacrifices, and eventually discovered the missing files. All of these memories were groomed into her mind over and over again. Everything was flawless in the saga, but the Inquisitor's instinct told her something was wrong, enough to make the lady doubt her own memory. "Your Excellency," the middle-aged priest's voice sounded from behind after the extended lingering. Something is wrong, I definitely didn't come here alone the last time. Someone did accompany me, but who was it?" As if she didn't hear the voice behind her, Vanna just focused on the problem. Once again, the memory of the 6th block chapel and the deceased nun came up. Everyone had forgotten that area ever existed, hence the reason why it went unnoticed for so long. Is this the same forgetting that I'm experiencing? Everyone forgot the same thing about that chapel, so no one could fill the hole. But what did I forget like everyone else? When did the forgetting happen? "Your Excellency," the voice of the middle-aged priest sounded from behind, but with more force. Vanna felt the storm's power converging, and the middle-aged priest's hand had quietly approached his waist where the gun was holstered. "How long have you been an administrator here?" Vanna asked suddenly. The storm's power dissipated, and the middle-aged priest lowered his guard before bowing his head slightly. "It's been 7 years. I've been here since I retired." "You shouldn't be the only administrator here, right?" Vanna asked again. "There are 2 of us. The other is an older lady in charge of the night duty. We're both retirees from the Guardian Force." As if chatting casually, Vanna continued to stroll between the bookshelves. "2 people. Do you ever get overwhelmed with work?" "Not usually. The work of an archivist doesn't have much to do. Trainees are usually the ones to fill and organize the files according to our instructions. Aside from the rare case of transporting dangerous materials over for storage, we rarely need to move around." The middle-aged priest didn't beat around the bush and explained his workload. If there is anything worthy of note, an archivist must be on constant watch for any irregularities. After all, we are the ones with the most experience, so those younger than us would often come to request our insight. Speaking of this, the middle-aged priest paused before adding, "Of course, having only 2 on a work rotation isn't the best arrangement. If an unexpected matter arises, we will usually be in a bind and must wake the other up to cover the shift. I've always felt that the ideal staff number should be 3. 3, Vanna muttered to herself, then asked, "Are the files of 1885 still unfound?" "Yes, it still hasn't been found yet," the middle-aged priest said, shaking his head. "After you mentioned the abnormal situation here, we immediately organized staffing to check the entire archive, utilizing hundreds of trainees and clerics for the job. Sadly, we found nothing." Vanna nodded and said no more. She only stared at the priest in silence like she's in deep thought, which roused a nervous smile from the other party. "Don't worry, I only met with that ghost captain once. I'm not at the point of delirium yet. However, warn me if there's any odd behavior with me, and I will do the same. I still haven't lost my professionalism." "I beg your pardon," the middle-aged priest sighed. "I've seen too many comrades in arms disappear from this world due to one's carelessness." Vanna didn't object to that advice and circled the aisle as if searching for something. Then, in a trance, she saw an imaginary glimpse of a fleeting figure standing at the desk near the entrance. The young inquisitor's eyes nearly popped out at this sight, only to have the figure disappear in the next. "Your Excellency, what have you discovered?" The middle-aged priest noticed this sudden behavior and asked. "Maybe I was mistaken. No, let's go over and see." Vanna hurriedly began walking without waiting for the other man to reply. She had already taken several steps before she could be followed, and soon she was practically jogging over to the curved desk. There was no one at the table, only a mechanical machine left in plain view that's used for administrative purposes. Vanna went around and behind the desk to investigate. There, she found a few scattered parts randomly discarded behind a baffle on the table's edge. The pieces had rusted, and it looked as if they had been discarded for an unknown number of years. Judging by their shape, it seems to be part of a mechanical cube. For some reason, Vanna had a strange smell hitting her nose when she saw these items. It's the scent of mechanical grease mixed in with incense that's been burned together. These things, who left them here? A puzzled voice belonging to the middle-aged priest said after catching up from behind with the lantern. There are traces on the table. Vanna had already found other clues next to the parts, which looked like some oil that's vaguely resembling a drawing. She felt her heart pounding. Then out of the blue, a harsh noise echoed in her head, causing the lady's vision to blur between light and shadow. However, this discomfort not only didn't bring panic to the Inquisitor's heart, but made her go wild with excitement. Vanna knew why this was happening. It's her blessings from the goddess activating, warning her. Whatever clue or truth she's searching for, it's here in the archive. Silently chanting the name of Gamona, the storm goddess, Vanna stretched her hand to the side. "Lend me the lantern." The middle-aged priest immediately handed over the lantern that's been inscribed with runes and fueled by divine grease as fuel. "Here you go." Vanna took it and carefully brought the light closer to the greased tabletop. Under the light, some fine smoke or mist had appeared out of thin air before fading quickly. Then she saw it between the crimps of light and shadow, the smudge. It was written in dark red blood, like a dying man's last-ditched effort to mark something on the table as a message. It looked like a cluster of bonfires with a cylindrical thing standing at the center of the flame. It was not any kind of sacred symbol used by the Storm Church, nor a blessing given by the storm goddess Gamona. Yet Vanna still recognized the symbol. It turned out to be the mark of the flame bearers. Flame bearer? Why is the mark of the flame bearers doing inside a storm church? Vanna wondered in her heart. Although the four righteous gods are indeed in the same camp, and there are many cooperative relationships between the four churches, they're still part of different religions. The flame bearers, the chapel in the 6th block, the forgotten nun, the forgotten event, another planned hidden under the real world. Vanna's breathing became rapid as she instantly connected the dots. This symbol was a warning, the only message left behind by the forgotten defender on this lonely battlefield. Someone polluted history, the young Inquisitor exclaimed and jerked around to face the administrative priest. Yet the archives were empty. From the beginning, it was as she's the only person here the entire time. Chapter 195, disappeared. With a clang, the silver fork in Dante Wayne's hand fell onto the plate. This startled the maid that's standing on the side of this partially empty dining hall. Quickly stepped forward to inquire about the situation. "Mr. Dante." Dante did not respond to the maid's inquiry. Instead, he sat in his seat in a daze, acting like his soul had been sucked out. But the admin suddenly blinked, and his consciousness seemed to abruptly return to reality with the paleness of someone on the brink of drowning. "Mr. Dante, are you okay?" The maid's voice came again, thundering in the ears of the city admin. Dante Wayne stared blankly at the fork on his plate, seeing not only the tableware, but also flashes of images from the past. It came so strongly that the prosthetic ruby eye had started to burn and sting with pain. Out of the blue, the man swung his head towards the maid and broke the silence with a deep, heavy voice. "Did Vanna send any news over?" The maid was stunned momentarily before responding to this respected city admin. "Who is Vanna?" In the next second, the maid was startled by Dante's livid face and gloomy aura. The man's face had changed so suddenly that even the air around him was cold and ominous. But after several seconds of this, the city admin finally clawed back his rage and maintained a calm air before waving the maid away. "You can leave me. I won't need any service for the time being." As the slightly nervous and confused maid left the dining hall, only Dante Wayne remained seated at the table. He didn't move or budge as if he's been here for the past 11 years using only this posture. Layers of intricate memories were floating through his mind, and reality from a different dimension seemed to overwrite his perception through this, but Dante didn't flinch or fret. Instead, he only softly muttered the following words as if he were praying. "Vanna is still alive, Vanna is still alive." But the man jerked his head in the next, after catching the sight of another figure sitting across from himself. It was another him. At least it looked like another version of himself. The thing was a grayish-white entity, wearing the same clothes as Dante Wayne, with the same appearance and hairstyle, and even the wrinkles on the back of his hand were the same. However, the facial features of the figure were slightly blurred, and its eyes were nothing more than two sunken sockets that were filled with endless emptiness. Dante quietly stared at the gray version of himself, and the other party also stared directly back at him with a taunting smirk. "Ah, a hole finally appears in your heart, my other me," the thing spoke with squirming lips. Dante Wayne froze to a halt, his eyes now glaring at the reflection opposite himself. "What did you do?" "Frankly, I don't know. It just happened so suddenly that even I was caught off guard. A loophole took the initiative to eliminate itself." The thing across the table shook his head. "But don't you want to see how it plays out? You no longer have to bear the pressure of the truth, and you no longer have to worry about the responsibilities of the future. Everything is back on track, and eternal liberation and tranquility await us all. Just as the wish you were granted, everyone's wishes will be granted too." The thing spoke weirdly but clearly as it slowly stood up with a broken grin. "I know your heart better than anyone." Dante Wayne also slowly stood up. There were no weapons in the dining room, but he always carried a short dagger with him just for these occasions. He gripped the handle and glared ferociously at the grayish figure. "You're just a hollow shadow of nothingness. What right do you have to judge the heart of humanity?" "I am the reflection in your soul brought to life by subspace." The gray figure spread his hands out despite the hostility shown. "Subspace knows everything, including the shallow and ridiculous human heart. Come on, kill me, see what happens. We've done this many times already in the past. It doesn't hurt to try again when things are coming to a close soon." But then the gray shadow's words ended abruptly at a sudden cluster of dark green flames wrapped around its body. This not only caught the shadow off guard, it also dismayed and shocked Dante across the table. A harsh howl and a strange whistling sound came simultaneously, and the sharp shockwave instantly shattered the glasses within the dining hall. However, this noise never got transmitted to the outside, as the space here had become confined to another dimension. The more the phantom resisted, the more the echo reverberated within these walls, until everything started to glow green. The vanished. These were the last words from the phantom's mouth before it was extinguished. Dante Wayne watched it all in awe until a burning pain pierced his own flesh. It's the inverse effect of having his reflection killed. He dropped the dagger to the floor and curled up, feeling the intense heat devour his own existence. The pain was soul-wrenching, but he didn't lose consciousness as his vision caught sight of the spreading flames roaming around his body instead of eating him. He was confused, rightfully so. However, he's more confused than ever at the animalistic behavior of a flame. It's behaving like a predator that had caught something revolting, the revolting thing being him. Then a wave of intense shock smothered his senses, pulling him into dimming darkness as the consciousness faded away. But before then, he could vaguely hear the exclaiming cry of a maid and many chaotic footsteps running inside the hall. After realizing she's been caught in something, Vanna calmly searched the empty archive for traces of the priest. For the first 2 minutes, she didn't move anywhere, didn't rush or try to flee, and didn't touch anything in her field of vision. This was to prevent herself from accidentally being polluted by the source of this illusion. It wasn't until she confirmed the items in her sight were normal entities and finished shielding her mind that she came to the back of the curved table. There, she decisively reached down and pressed a button under the desk. That's the bell to sound the alarm, and it rang with a sharp and deafening harsh ring. Done, Vanna lowered her head again and stared at the lantern in hand. The middle-aged priest had disappeared, but the lantern he lent her was still here, radiating a warm glow with that haloing light. Although it was not dark in the archive, the flame that was created with grease still carried the divine properties of repelling evil. This gave Vanna the confidence to circle around the area again, finding nothing but herself within this building. Finally, her sight fell upon the scattered parts and blood marks left on the table. No one came inside still despite the alarms going off. Now the young inquisitor understood why. It's not the priest who disappeared, it's herself. The moment this thought emerged, Vanna felt a veiling curtain finally lifting from her chest. Reality and lies, both versions have now collapsed into one, revealing the truth of what this world truly was, a flaming inferno as far as the eye could see. And in the raging sea of fire, a thin, scrawny figure holding a black umbrella was standing in the near distance from the lady. "You," the umbrella man raised an arm to point at Vanna and spoke hoarsely. Vanna only listened to one syllable before she took off with her giant broadsword at the foe. The Inquisitor did not hesitate in the slightest and swung down with one hand while carrying the lantern in the other. By the time her attack was about to come down, she's already closed the gap to 3 meters. Heretic. Chapter 196. Reckless Player. Vanna didn't immediately recognize the origin of the figure that suddenly appeared in front of her, mainly due to the other party's whole body being covered by a long black trench coat and a big black umbrella. Moreover, her own consciousness was briefly stunned by the glimpse through the curtain, causing the momentary loss of sharpness. But when the monster made its hoarse and low growl, when the other party's dirty and profane breath was revealed, and when the polluted and corrupt outline showed between its raised hands, she finally recognized it. It was heresy, the heresy of the Black Sun. Things became very simple then, and Vanna loves simple things. The heavy greatsword whistled terrifyingly through the air with a smooth grace, and the sacred lantern dispelled the unclean breath as Vanna's tall figure jumped up like a mountainous wave. When she finally came down, the assault had brought with it the power of the tsunami, which caught the foe by surprise due to how sudden it came out. Then, like a broken boat hit by a huge wave, even the umbrella and person were split in 2 down the middle. The dregs of the sun air got blown off into the distance with an audible splat, leaving a trail of blood and gore in its wake. But unlike the flesh of the air, the broken umbrella had dropped on the spot, expelling a series of crackling blue flints and a splutter of blue crystals from the disconnected segment. Vanna crushed the umbrella with her foot the second she got the opening. She must remove any unknown variable from the fight when she could because the split body of the sun air had already begun to reform. It didn't take long, only a few seconds before her foe was standing again. This time, though, the mangled flesh that made up its head was even uglier than before, and it squirmed ferociously with those grotesque tentacles. Even its growling roar was more pronounced, bringing a shockwave that could knock a regular person out. Yet Vanna was smiling at this behavior. Regenerative ability did not equal invincibility. She could tell this thing had gotten weak and in a lot of pain after losing the weird black umbrella. Casually strapping the lantern to her waist, Vanna adjusted her sword stance and strode towards the monster with her weapon in hand. But suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a momentary distortion of the flames next to a bookcase. Years of combat experience and intuition told her to stop, which her body did by swinging around. In the next second, a squirming tentacle had launched out of the fire, whipping a sheet of metal at her like a cannonball. Simultaneously, the injured sun air had just finished its regeneration when it transmorphed into a glob of oozing black shadow, firing off 2 tentacles of his own at the lady's neck and back, effectively creating a pincer attack with its hidden companion. Vanna clicked her tongue at the annoyance. She snapped around and raised her sword to lance it out as a projectile first, spearing the shadowy glob directly in the center as a result. It pinned the foe into the nearest wall from the sheer force of her sword and caused another splat. Simultaneously, Vanna didn't forget to catch the steel-plated projectile that's already in her face. With a pinch that's so fast that it left an afterimage, the lady caught the scorching metal with 2 fingers and left only several inches of space between her skin. It seems that you are the ones responsible for this. As if there was no pain, Vanna casually tore the piece of steel in half and threw it aside. At the same time, she beckoned to her sword to return, summoning it with an invisible force that had also brought the squirming blob of blackness over. With a flick of her right hand, Vanna casually threw the monster nailed to her sword into the ground. Then, without looking back, she left the rapidly regenerating monster and walked forward, leaving only 1 sentence to her rear. "You stay here and regenerate. I will purify your accomplice first." The creeping flesh and blood that was pierced by the giant sword had lost the protection of the black umbrella. Even if she left the monster to do its own thing, it would be far weaker and too slow to try anything. Knowing this fact, the Inquisitor now shifted her focus at the burning bookcase that launched the sneak attack in the distance, a second sun air. Seeing its position discovered, the second shadow had stopped hiding and stepped forward from the flames. It's just like the first, tall and thin, with a series of tentacles squirming out from the long trench coat. The thing was growling disgusting words at the Inquisitor, cursing her to not get any closer. Fear, anger, confusion. It seems that they also have emotional reactions, not just a group of split bodies who lack a complete mind as many people thought, Vanna said calmly as she walked forward. She didn't forget to watch out for more sneak attacks, and as a mean to combat the blasphemous roars from the monster that might affect her mind, she started to speak to it as well as a counter. "The dregs of the sun heirs, since you are here, it means that at least one of the sun heirs are nearby. Where?" In the depths of the sea of fire, outside the church, or... The monster launched into an attack before the lady could finish, sending a tentacle out from the side to slice off Vanna's neck. Of course, this didn't work since the Inquisitor's ready for it. With a simple side step, she casually avoided the hit and grabbed the thorn-riddled tentacle to unleash a skill of her own, a vibrating shockwave that she used in her dream with Duncan, too. Letter 16B1 Letter 1D00. Is it in that fire of 1889, or in that chapel of 1885? The tip of the tentacle in Vanna's hand exploded into a cloud of blood first, then the main branch of the appendage exploded as well, spreading like a plague into the main body of the shadow. It wasn't until 1/3 of the shadow's figure were gone did it get halted, which was fine for Vanna since it's enough time for her to charge forward. Raising her giant broadsword, she swung it down like a club at the monster's head. With a loud bang, the monster's roar abruptly stopped and flew into the distance like a filthy lump of meat. It landed next to the remnants of the first sun air that had partially finished regenerating into its thin, scrawny self. And like before, the tentacles had mimicked the shape of a black trench coat that's essentially being used as a form of protective shell. Pleased with herself, Vanna casually came before the two attackers and peered down condescendingly over them. Although I don't know why the black sun managed to mix itself into the pollution of history, and I don't know what your main body has prepared for me, but one thing is definitely true. I'll fight you all here to see if you're truly endless. Either I kill all of you, or I will prove my loyalty and faith to the goddess. With a raised greatsword, the sound of meticulous chopping continues. Vanna's idea was simple. The heirs of the sun have powerful regenerative abilities, but no matter how powerful their regeneration was, it's not invincible. As long as their recovery consumes their strength, then it's not a problem to solve. It's okay to make small, careful cuts. If it doesn't work, she could always cut twice. Shirley opened her eyes after a heavy slumber, finding an unfamiliar ceiling and the faint sunlight streaming through the nearby window. The bed under her body was comfortable, and the quilt had a fresh and dry smell to it. This kind of dryness was difficult to come by in the slums, because the oldest pipes and silted sewers were always gathered in those guttered alleys. Even if one did hang the quilt out to dry, it would only soak in more of the sewer smell into the fabric due to how proliferate it was in the damp air. Shirley lay quietly in bed, reluctant to even turn due to the comforting sensation. But in the end, she propped herself up with both hands to look around. Nina was no longer in the room, and based on the angle of the sunlight coming through the window, it's likely already noon. "Dog," Shirley called softly, "how long have I been asleep?" Dog's voice immediately sounded in her heart. "It's at least 10:30 now, maybe 11. You fell asleep directly in bed after eating and taking a bath yesterday. So, at least for 12 hours, that's normal after expending so much energy." Shirley was still a little dazed right now. What happened yesterday felt like a dream, floating in her head with segments popping up without intent, which would take time to sort out and confirm what's real and fantasy. Then she raised her head and looked into the corner of the room. A simple little box sat quietly there. That's her all for the past 10 years, she and dogs everything. "We really moved here," Shirley muttered. "It's like a dream." "Don't say it, I'm still panicking right now. Mr. Duncan is cooking in the kitchen, and I don't even dare to think about what he might serve to the table later." "Dog, why do you have such a big opinion about the food here? You have been uttering that more than once already." Don't ask." Listening to Dog's complaints, Shirley suddenly broke out into laughter. "The sun is so nice today." Chapter 197, Sunny Day. The sun shone brightly outside the window, and the previous horrible weather seemed like a distant dream now. The only traces of that rainstorm would be the water left on the windowsill and the wet ground out on the streets. It's a good day to take an afternoon nap, but Shirley had slept enough. In fact, she had never slept for so long in one sitting, and her stomach was growling a little, the signal to get up. Unlike a normal child, Shirley had some pretty unpleasant memories of lying in bed with a hungry stomach. It was when she was still extremely young after losing her parents, the first winter of that year. She had no one to help but Dog. The weather was cold and snowing outside, and the tiny hut she found to cuddle in for the night leaked. As a hungry child desperately needing sleep, she would have died from the frost without help. Thankfully, Dog was there, keeping her company and awake. Falling asleep while hungry during such a cold winter night would have left her dead. "Shirley, are you awake? I heard movement." It was Nina's voice that came from the hallway after Shirley had just finished changing out of her clothes. "I am awake," Shirley stammered for a reply to the voice. The door got pushed open, and Nina, wearing a white shirt and light brown skirt, came waltzing inside with a smile. "You slept for so long. How are you feeling now? Does your back still hurt? What happened to the wound? Let me see, let me see." "I expended a lot of energy, so I slept for a bit longer than usual. I'm okay, really." Shirley tried to dodge the overly enthusiastic Nina to no avail. In front of this infinitely energetic girl, it's better to submit than to resist. "It's just a small injury. I am very resilient, and you're tickling me, don't be itchy, haha." "It's really healed?" Nina finally let go of Shirley, who had jumped to the side with a look of fleeing a predator. "It was still such a big wound last night, and now it's not only gone but not even a scar is left. How did you do it?" "Didn't I tell you before? I live in symbiosis with a shadow demon. The characteristics of dog are a strong body and regenerative ability." Shirley straightened her dress. The one she wore yesterday had been destroyed in the battle, so the one she had on was a different one rescued from the rubbles. "Actually, my regenerative ability can be a little stronger, but dog said I am malnourished, so my regenerative ability is reduced." "Then you have to eat plenty here. Uncle's cooking is excellent," Nina said immediately. Then, making a curious face, "Are you all like this? I mean, is everyone with a shadow demon so powerful?" "Specifically, it depends on what kind of demon symbiosis they have. The powers of a dark hound are strength and regeneration, as well as a certain increase in perception. We're also more resistant to spiritual pollution. Anyways, there are many types of shadow demons with different abilities. I don't know all of them, just that they're all unique in their own ways." Shirley suddenly paused at the mention, her expression growing more severe while meeting Nina's gaze. "Speaking of which, I suggest you don't get too involved in this field. You should already know that under normal circumstances, those who coexist with the shadow demons are the madmen of the Annihilation sect. They are different from me, and their demons are not the same as dog." I know, I'm not a child." Nina waved her hand quickly, still unable to hide her curiosity. "But have you seen any other demon symbiotes? I mean those Annihilation believers." "I haven't seen any, and I don't want to see meet any. It's disgusting enough to listen to the description given to me by dog, and if I do meet them, I will report them to the authorities," Shirley said with a frown. "Nina, you have a lot of questions today. You didn't ask so much when you met dog before, so why did you suddenly change your heart? What happened at school today?" "You will live in my house from now on. Of course, I must know more about you. Uncle said your home was destroyed by a gas explosion, so you don't have anywhere else to go," Nina said with a serious face. Then snatching Shirley's hand to bring her out. "In addition, school is on holiday. I have 2 months of vacation time now, didn't you know?" "How do I know? I haven't been to school before," Shirley muttered subconsciously while already being dragged out the door. Even from their distance, the girls could smell the intoxicating scent of food wafting through the air. "Isn't Mr. Duncan there?" "Uncle went down to the first floor. He said he needed to entertain someone first, so let's eat on the second floor first," Nina explained while pulling Shirley toward the kitchen door. But then she quickly turned towards the bathroom after remembering something. "All right, wash your hands and face before eating. Otherwise, Uncle will nag again." Oh. Shirley literally became a doll at this point, being dragged around left and right without a say in her choosing. It's borderline abusive if one watches their antics. Nevertheless, it's a good type of abuse, the kind that's only found in a warm bodily home with people around. At the same time, next to the counter on the first floor of the antique shop, Duncan was explaining something to the person opposite of himself. It's a young lady wearing a delicate and elegant long dress. She had long blonde hair with a dignified and beautiful appearance. Dignified and beautiful blonde lady, no. Alice in a wig, yes. That's pretty much it. There's a lot of common sense that you need to know about in human society, but the most basic part is what I've told you. With your current scope of activities, it should be enough. Just get familiar with the store and its occupants first, like cleaning and greeting the customers when they come in." Duncan finally finished explaining what to pay attention to, but still looked uneasy at the smiling blonde girl sitting across from him. "Do you remember what I taught you on the ship before?" I remember," Alice nodded vigorously. Then just as quickly, she reduced the speed of her nod to portray an elegant lady. "Don't worry, I remember it clearly." "Yes, the nod should be small. It seems that you remember this part at least." Duncan exhaled and reviewed Alice's appearance to confirm the last few details. The original long silver hair had been covered with a golden wig, slight makeup, applied to adjust the details in her appearance, and the lower half of the face covered with a veil to keep others from recognizing her. As for the joints, she also had a neck ring to cover that area while wearing long white gloves to hide the arms. That effectively camouflaged any joints that could possibly show up. Of course, it's still possible for someone to notice the oddity in Alice's appearance if they knew the Frost Queen personally, but the odds of that happening was negligible. Ray Nora was a queen from half a century ago. For the odds of someone from Frost visiting planned, then coming to the lower city and visiting Duncan's antique shop, that's effectively impossible in terms of odds. Duncan couldn't help but sigh at his own ingenuity. Truthfully, he had initially planned to wait a little longer to let Alice come aboard the city and see the world. But when he last checked up on this doll, he had seen her constantly mourning along the deck of the Vanished, peering out into the distance like a bored child with nothing to do. No matter how firm he was on staying safe, forcing someone to do nothing was equivalent to torture. Duncan was no monster. Taking the opening while Nina and Shirley were still eating upstairs, he grabbed AI and had her transport Alice over from the ship for the first time. And just as quickly, he regretted the decision right away. The doll had instantly jumped to the shop window and pressed her face against the glass like a buffoon, constantly asking this, and asking that over whatever she saw moving about outside. Even now, while conversing, Alice fidgeted and turned side to side without meeting his eyes like a nosy kid. Chapter 198. Alice's first day in the world. Duncan was a little creeped out with the way he was being stared at by the puppet. Then after calming down for a few seconds, he finally couldn't help but ask with a frown, "What are you looking at?" Alice was honest, "Looking at you." Duncan now got confused. "What's so interesting about me?" "It's the first time I've seen you talking like this," Alice said in disbelief. "Although you said before I have another body and identity here, I still find it incredible when I see it. Captain, your appearance is completely different from that on the ship, not so tall or gloomy. You look like a good person." Duncan's eyes widened when he heard this, and before he could speak, Alice hurriedly added, I shouldn't slander you, Captain. How many times have I said it? Don't learn random stuff from Goathead. Praising others as good people is not slandering, it's the same for me too." Duncan stared at the idiot in front of him, feeling a brain aneurysm forming. "And you forgot the reminder. You can't call Captain on this side. You have to call me Mr. Duncan or Mr. Shopkeeper, understand?" Alice shrunk her head. I remember call Mr. Shopkeeper." "Why don't you just call Mr. Duncan?" Duncan sighed wearily. "At least you are still familiar with this name, and the probability of calling it wrong is relatively low." "Ooh, okay, Mr. Duncan." Alice hurriedly bowed her head and agreed, only to hear Duncan helplessly reminding her halfway, "Don't bow your head, otherwise your head will fall off again. If you drop your head in full view, your journey to the city-state will end." Alice agreed with a hum, but then frowned in the next. "I seem to have heard AI mutter a similar sentence to what you just said. What did she say?" "The head, the crown will." "Do you have a crown on your head?" Duncan glared. "You have a wig on your head and it's stronger than your head." Alice thought for a while and giggled. He. Then after 2 seconds of silence, the doll began to act out again. "Captain, can I touch your face?" Duncan looked puzzled. "I don't mind, but why?" Alice had already started on him when she heard the words, "don't mind." It seemed that after leaving Captain Duncan's majestic mane, shell, the doll's boldness had swelled unprecedentedly. She stepped forward and pinched Duncan's current cheek, making eyes of surprise as she did so. "So amazing! It's real! When I was on the ship, you looked like you were carved out of stone with that face." Duncan was extremely taken aback inside and wanted to break free from those hands. "Are you done yet?" Before his words could finish, he heard 2 brisk footsteps coming down from the direction of the staircase. It's Nina and Shirley, with the former calling out pleasantly, "Uncle, I've finished eating with Shirley. What are you doing here?" Duncan turned his head like a robot, showing the awkward face of someone being caught in an embarrassing situation. "So what's so embarrassing?" Alice still had her hands on the man's face, thus creating a rather fluttery scene of 2 partners having a go at it. Why did you stop suddenly?" Shirley asks after bumping her head against her friend's back. Alice immediately withdrew her hands over the interruption, folding both hands in her lap to put on a dignified posture of a Victorian-era lady. Meanwhile, Nina had become so shell-shocked that she couldn't process the image. There's a gorgeous lady in her home, and an elegant blonde that's likely from the upper city at that. Dog, quickly look, who is that sitting across from Mr. Duncan? Is she human? Can you beat her?" Dog's voice hesitated for a long time before coming through, sounding extremely cautious. "I can't see clearly through your eyes, but the more you look at her, the less she looks like a person. I don't know if I can win. Regardless, definitely don't fight her." Letter 213. Now Shirley got shocked. "Why? You can't even see what she is, so why are you so afraid?" "Are you dumb? She actually dares to pinch Mr. Duncan's face." Dog's voice sounded so cowardly that it was painful. Just that fact alone is enough to put her on the level of being able to stew us, and not just any stew, the type where I will go chop the firewood for the stove. Dog, you are too embarrassing, you know that. I call this knowing when to be the dead dog. Do you know how many human beings spend their entire lives mastering the art of survival? Shirley didn't want to talk with Dog anymore because it's too humiliating. While the pair talked through their mental connection, Nina had already arrived before her uncle and the blonde lady. "Uncle, who is this lady?" Nina asked curiously, and subconsciously looked at Alice on the side with surprise and speculation in her heart. "Oh, good timing. Let me introduce her." Duncan coughed lightly to alleviate the embarrassment just now. Then with a calm face, he raised a finger. "Her name is Alice. Remember what I said before about getting help at the shop? She will be working here." After that, he immediately pointed to Nina and Shirley. "This is my niece, Nina, and this is Shirley, who will temporarily live here for the time being." "Hello," Alice immediately took the initiative to greet the girls. This time she remembered Duncan's reminder and stopped goofing around. However, her gesture only made the doll appear more noble-like, showing an indescribable level of elegance found only in those with a high upbringing. Girls' first meeting, epic misunderstanding. Hello," Nina gulped nervously, nodding to Alice as if her lax manner would offend the other side. "Nice to meet you." Shirley didn't dally around either and closely followed by saying hello. She was also a little nervous, but her nervousness came more from what Dog said earlier. "Hello, I too am glad." Then the scene froze, with faces tense on both sides. Shirley and Nina didn't know how to continue. In their mind, whatever they said would only displease this elegant character that's clearly not from the lower city. Meanwhile, Alice had even simpler ideas. Her mind was blank in this case. Thankfully, it's not much like on some occasions. Fortunately, Duncan had expected this situation. When he saw the cold scene on both sides, he knew what was going on and immediately broke the silence with a light cough. "Ahem, Shirley, how is your injury?" "Oh, my injury is completely healed." Shirley took a moment before reacting, then quickly stood up and answered Duncan's question like a report. "And I ate a lot just now. I'm not hungry at all anymore." "I didn't ask you this, but if you like today's meal, that's good to hear." Duncan smiled and nodded. "Spend the next 2 days replenishing your body. I will make something nutritious to restore your vitality. Nina, do you have any plans for today?" "I'm going to take Shirley out to shop in the neighborhood," Nina said immediately. "She needs some new clothes and shoes." Speaking of this, she turned back to explain her meaning. This was to prevent her friend from being offended. "This is a meeting gift for you, and it is rude not to accept it." I surely didn't know what to say for a while. Ultimately, the poor child could only nod. "Okay, thank you in advance, and Mr. Duncan." Duncan nodded with a smile. "Then don't go too far and come back before evening. Shirley, you are in charge of protecting Nina." Shirley immediately straightened her back and replied with a military voice that startled Nina. "Yes, Mr. Duncan." Afterwards, both girls bid their farewells to Duncan and Alice, heading for the main doorway with Nina still muttering as she walked. "Why did you yell so loud? It scared me, Uncle." "My uncle is not scary." I'm being polite. I've been learning politeness lately." Listening to the fading muttering of the girls, Duncan couldn't help but smile before turning back to Alice. "Why are you staring at me again?" "Mr. Duncan, you're very different here than on the ship." Alice looked at Duncan very seriously. "Much more cordial than on the ship." "Okay, don't fret about unimportant stuff." Duncan smiled helplessly. Of course, he knew why Alice would feel this way since he had actually been tensed on the ship. Even if he had relaxed in the recent period, it was not at all as free as on the city-state's side. But he didn't bother with this matter and quickly moved the topic elsewhere, saying, "Let's talk about you first. You don't have a legal identity, so it's best not to go to the upper city to attract attention. I will first have you help in the antique shop during this period. It will allow you to adapt to the environment, and on the other hand, you can also help me do something while I'm out. Like taking care of customers behind this counter. Wait, I suddenly thought of something." With a strange expression, Duncan stopped and stared at the puppet before him. "You know about money." Alice's face was full of curiosity. "What is money?" Duncan. Chapter 199, 199. The Vigilance of Historians. Duncan felt that he had been careless. He only thought about Alice's lack of common sense to live in the human world. What he didn't take into consideration was the extent of this ignorance. To think Alice didn't even know what money was, in that case, how is she supposed to help around the store? But then it's quite reasonable if he thought about it. After all, the lady doesn't need to spend money while lying inside the coffin box. Egg, while Shirley and Nina are away, I'd better continue to make up lessons with you. Duncan sighed at being forced to give up his afternoon plans. First of all, I must let you know the most basic things in the human world, such as currency. He paused and sighed again. Egg, now that I think about it, I really have to open up a study class with you and Shirley. Oh, Shirley, the short girl just now, right? Alice immediately showed a face full of joy like she was happy to meet someone new. I heard you say she is just like me. What's it called again? Illiterate. It's not something to be happy about. Duncan knocked on the table. And even Shirley is better than you. At least the girl knows how to evade the bus fare when taking a ride. Alice, what is fare evasion? Duncan. What? Heidi sneezed hard after feeling a chill run down her skin. Getting up to close the living room window, the doctor sniffled her nose and muttered in complaint at the fluctuating weather. Then, with a worried look, she peered over at her father, who was sitting in a daze at the coffee table nearby. School had been out for the holidays. Normally, her father would spend the next 2 months visiting the major libraries to kill time during the autumn months, but Morris had been acting strange and lethargic today for some reason. Father's been acting this way since he returned from Mr. Duncan's antique shop. He didn't even go to his study when he returned. Did something happen during his visit? Are you all right? Heidi finally didn't hold back and bent down to ask with concern, are you not feeling well? After asking twice in a row, Morris finally heard his daughter's voice. Quickly raising his head, the old historian felt the buzzing subside slightly before waving his hand. I'm okay. Oh, you didn't go to church or city hall today? Didn't go to the clinic either. I've already completed the work from the church and city hall, and the clinic is closed today. Heidi's furrowed brows did not loosen after the response. I remember you asking me that this morning already. Oh, right, I forgot. Morris lightly tapped his temple and said with some hesitation. He knew he wasn't in a great state. The man knew this. However, he couldn't explain it to his daughter either. After all, revealing the existence of a subspace shadow lurking within the city was a huge matter. It might anger Mr. Duncan and pollute Heidi's mind in the process. The low buzzing sound sounded in his head again at Duncan's name, which interrupted Morris's train of thought. But soon, the noise subsided after a sting, allowing his train of thought to stabilize for the second time. Static noise, the consequence of returning from that antique shop. Morris knew that he should be thankful for being able to keep his life and sanity. Yes, he's got some symptoms of critical madness lingering, but after some self-assessment, Morris was sure the problem would subside on its own after some rest. But before the symptoms disappear entirely, he will have to keep worrying Heidi like this. Morris frowned suddenly, remembering that his daughter was a brilliant psychiatrist. She could not be allowed to continue to notice his mental state. Did you talk to Mr. Duncan about anything yesterday? I feel like you've always been absent-minded when you come back. Heidi's voice came again. Some topics in the field of knowledge, very profound knowledge. Morris couldn't suppress the information about the creeping sun wheel in his mind, recalling the news of what Mr. Duncan revealed about the current situation of the Black Sun. The information acted like it had a mind of its own, wandering through his head like a parasite that's trying to devour his brain. It's quite consuming of my brain power, so I couldn't figure it out yet. Don't mind me. Anyways, let's not talk about this matter. What happened to the appointment with your friend? Didn't you say you're going to the theaters on your day off? Heidi was stunned. Friend? I don't remember. Which friend did I make an appointment with? Are you sure you? Did I make a mistake? Morris rubbed his temples. For some reason, he suddenly felt his temples throbbing as if a trance had overtaken his mind. But I clearly remember you saying that there was a friend the day before. What's their name? A very tall one, and someone I'm familiar with. The throbbing in his temple started irritating Morris, causing him to gently pound his head with the fist instead. Her father's action naturally alarmed Heidi, who was initially only puzzled, but now she's downright panicking. Squatting down to grasp the old historian's hand. Are you okay? Is it a headache? Do you want? Shall I give you a hypnotic relaxation or calming, or find another doctor? I don't need a doctor, I don't need it. Morris waved his hand vigorously. The noise in his head had returned again, but this time it was different from the last. Unlike before, the sound seemed to be desperately trying to convey some information, desperately waking up something. It's as if another consciousness had awakened in his mind. That consciousness was still his own, but it had a subtle deviation from his current thinking. I just need to recall something, recall a very important thing. Heidi, you have a friend, listen, you have a friend, a very important. The worry and nervousness on Heidi's face became more and more severe. She squeezed Morris's other hand hard, and her words were already filled with calming power out of reflex. Of course I have friends, but which one are you talking about? Morris could no longer hear Heidi's words. A sudden bang roared within his head, which was the momentary release of all the compressed noise at once. Then the static plaguing his thinking had disappeared entirely, with many strange memories pouring into the depths of his consciousness. He had fallen into a trance and saw things, a giant, full of starlight, twisted and fused by crushed mirrors, and then he saw the green flames. It burned away the fog clouding his head. This time he did not lose his sanity by witnessing the giant. On the contrary, the impression gave him the strength to break through the invisible curtain blocking his vision until now. Where is Vanna? Morris suddenly raised his head and stared into Heidi's eyes. Heidi was stunned. Who is Vanna? Inquisitor of the city-state, one of your best friends, niece of Admin Dante, Morris said slowly. His breathing had stabilized, and his eyes returned to their former depth and sharpness. Right now, two very different memories existed within his mindset, one clearly identifiable and recognizable, the other distant and unfamiliar. Imagine two historical scrolls laid out side by side. That's what's happening with him. You don't remember, do you? Heidi hesitated. I don't know who you're talking about, but your state worries me. Don't worry about me. I'm in very good shape right now. Also, it's not me we should be worried about, it's Vanna. Morris suddenly stood up, his expression more serious than ever. Heidi, a big problem may be happening within our city grounds. We have to take action. Heidi subconsciously followed by getting up, and she could feel her father's spirit returning again. As to why, she still didn't know what. Action? What action? Go to the main cathedral, go to Bishop Valentine, tell him, Morris said quickly but stopped halfway through. After weighing what should be said, he nervously shook his head. No, Vanna's accident may also be because she realized the truth. Find Bishop Valentine. Tell him you are seeking asylum, the highest level of asylum. Tell him I made you do this, that the most eminent historian of Planned made you do this. Do not say anything else other than that. Heidi listened in a daze. She sensed that something dangerous and urgent might be happening, things that could not be said in the open. Controlling her urge to ask, she readied herself according to her father's instructions. What about you? What are you going to do, father? She asks after getting surprised by Morris taking the coat up from the hanger. Go to the antique shop, Morris said in a deep voice. Chapter 200, Interception. It was obviously still sunny in the morning, but now the sky had turned gloomy for some reason. Gray clouds and fog blanketed Planned from top to bottom, leaving the bell towers and chimney in the distance looking like structures of black ink. Two cars drove out of the Underwood family's mansion under this weather, one heading straight up the avenue and towards the city center, while the other swerved onto the side street to the lower city. Morris sat in the driver's seat and cautiously steered the vehicle along the roads while constantly keeping track of the weather outside. The sky had grown even darker than just now, and the chaotic downdraft caused everything to flap and howl with a sense of eeriness. This unsettled the old historian inside. From what he recalled, the last visit to the antique shop was exactly like this, bad weather. Raising his right hand and patting his head to refresh himself, Morris glanced at the string of stones on his wrist using the corner of his eye. Between the intricately structured knots, only 4 colored stones remained. These divinely blessed stones shimmered faintly in the groggy skylight, carrying an atmosphere that calmed his soul. Laham's protection allows scholars to temporarily save their lives in the face of incomprehensible knowledge, but the usage had limited utility in the face of truly dangerous entities. Morris didn't know what awaited him at his final destination, or whether the stones could protect him like the last, but he still decided to go. As long as you control your curiosity, as long as you don't open your true eyes, as long as you don't observe Mr. Duncan and all the things around him, you are safe, Morris. The subspatial shadow is friendly. As long as you don't cross the line, he will not harm you and may even offer help. Morris took a gentle breath and let his pounding heart to slowly calm down. He knew that he had touched upon some terrible truth beneath the peaceful surface of the city-state, but instead of choosing to report it to the church himself, he'd rather go meet an unspeakable being from subspace. This was undoubtedly a rebellious or even heretical act. But he still made this bold decision. Heidi had already gone to the cathedral to seek refuge with that cryptic message he ordered her to convey. If Laham's will permits and prevails, it should raise the vigilance of Bishop Valentine. That's all he could do in that regard. Right now, his duty lies in reaching the antique shop down in the lower city. He's already certain something has happened to Vanna. If the foe could take down the Inquisitor, it implies even the church itself may not be enough to handle the enemy this time. As a man of wisdom and knowledge, Morris couldn't place all the eggs in one basket. He must seek reinforcement. A thunderous bang suddenly rumbled across the sky, jolting Morris back to attention as he drove. The noise startled him, of course, but he was even more surprised by the faintly rising smoke in the distance. It seemed that the falling thunder had set a roof ablaze somewhere. Grumbling irritably after realizing the flame would hinder his route since it's up ahead, the old historian cursed and drove into the closest turn for another path. However, he did not get far before several crazed dogs suddenly sprang out of an alley and caused him to stomp the brakes. This wouldn't be so bad since it only gave him a light scare, but another man had suddenly stomped out of the shadow with a club in hand. The person was clearly drunk in the way he was cursing at the stray dogs and waving his weapon like a maniac. "What a madman," Morris frowned, honking the horn hard to get the drunk out of the way. However, the other party didn't seem to hear his horn and ignored it. In fact, the noise seemed to anger the drunk, who suddenly smashed the front of the car with that club. Morris was surprised by the hit, but the shock only lasted a second before his eyes locked onto the drunken man's frothing gaze. Immediately, he recited in a low, harsh voice, "The geometric law of Matatsaro." Huge chaotic knowledge suddenly poured into the drunken man's head, sending a brief but substantial informational storm inside the consciousness of the drunk. Without a fiddle, the reckless and drunk man issued an agonizing roar of pain before running off in the opposite direction. Morris restarted the car immediately and pumped the gas to ditch the barking dogs in the rear. He's grown edgy and alarmed now, which he rightfully should since a ditch pipe in his field of vision suddenly popped out of nowhere. The escaped steam instantly blocked his view, sending the car to swerve wildly at the lack of vision. He's sure of it now. It's not the bad weather, poor luck, or his bad state of mind, but rather someone's trying to stop him from moving forward. This was not a strict blockade, nor was it an outright lethal threat, but a series of unexpected events akin to a stress response, like an alarm rule set by the Creator. How does this alarm rule come into effect, and how did they find out? Is it because of our awakening, or a specific action? I only vaguely glimpsed into the truth and did not even have the chance to confront the shadow in the background yet, and the response is this strong. Then what about Vanna? What did she discover to be erased from reality itself? Morris silently recited Laham's holy name, catching a glimpse of the colored stones still shimmering on his wrist. Then, once confirmed he was not under anyone's influence, he cranked the gears and changed course toward the main street of the 4th block, knowing various obstacles may come out of nowhere at any second. What will they do if I go out in the open? Morris blinked after that thought, suddenly catching a figure sitting directly behind himself through the rearview mirror. It's a man dressed in tattered ascetic robes with a thin and shriveled build like that of a skeleton. Currently, this individual was making a grotesque smile at Morris. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morris," the shriveled figure spoke suddenly, still polite but creepy. "Where are you going?" "I should have known when I discussed the Wilhelm Summons affair with Mr. Duncan. I should have thought of your kind Ender missionaries." Morris slammed on the brakes and swung his head around to confront the intruder in the back seat. "When did you get inside my car?" "It's hard to say. It could have been yesterday, or maybe it was 1889, or even the day when you and your wife bought this car." The thin man seemed to be pleased by the hostile glare from Morris and showed a wrinkled grin from that shriveled-up face. "Is there something of importance to be in such a hurry?" Morris replied with silence, but the thin Ender was unimpressed and continued to speak politely. "Apologies, but I cannot allow you to reach your destination. I won't take your life, though. After all, you did pray to subspace during that great fire, too. From a certain perspective, you're also a partial compatriot. Oh, forgive me, you didn't know, did you? You didn't know who you were praying to." Morris's face became ugly and white before finally showing a wry smile. "So that's why. As we always say, subspace is the promised land which will respond to all wishes of the living." The Ender raised a hand and said reverently before gazing at Morris, "What will you do next? Try to expel me? I have learned about the power of the God of wisdom. His believers are given the power of the word, right? You can turn your knowledge and memory into power, shooting out words like bullets. I would love to see." Bang banged. A series of 6 deafening gunshots exploded within the car, and before the Ender could finish speaking, he was already turned into a corpse by a large-caliber revolver. 2 bullets had made a hit, one entering the heart while another landed in the forehead. As the shriveled body quickly turned into pale fragments and scattered like dust against the wind, Morris raised his right hand with a smoking revolver gun in hand. "I have all the bullets I need here. Why should I waste words on you?" After muttering those words, he casually reloaded the bullets and started the car again. He knew his journey was still difficult, and something might still be blocking him ahead. Therefore, killing a single Ender would not end everything. In fact, this same one might just return tomorrow and continue pestering him. He knows this because the fact that the other side dares to show up in his car means his death meant nothing.